Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the February 2026 monthly Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting. A minute of silence honoring Gus Sanfilippo, a previous commission member, and the other 6 lives lost at sea 11 days ago. Also, I'd like the commission members to know, oh, there he is. Willie, you made it. We can't hear you. Unmute.
Can you hear me now, Ray?
Yes, we can, Willie. Welcome aboard.
Thanks very much. I'm very, very happy to be here.
I was also going to announce we have a complete commission of members today with the addition of Willie Goldsmith. So please introduce yourself. We lost you again, Willie. No audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for the warm welcome. I'm really glad to be here. I'm really honored to be part of this commission and looking forward to discussion. I'll keep things short and sweet here, but really looking forward to learning from all of you and hopefully getting to know those of you who I don't, and getting to have some really constructive continuing discussions with those whom I do. So again, grateful and humbled to be here, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Willie. And you can wish a warm welcome, can't you?
Welcome aboard, Willie.
Absolutely. Welcome, Willie.
All right, we're going to move right along. The review of the February 2026 business meeting agenda. Any edits or thoughts of changing anything on this agenda?
Yes, Ray, Bill Doyle.
Yes, you recognize Bill.
I just, at some point, maybe under new business, I'd like to introduce the idea of a letter from the commission supporting the modeling of the water treatment plants, continued monitoring of the water treatment plants that DMF has been doing.
Okay, so we'll discuss that under other business.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Mr. Chair, as a point of order, and it should have been on the agenda, but since we toggled from a in-person meeting to a virtual meeting, it slipped my mind, but we do need a quick roll call vote or a roll call attendance of the commission. So I'll call that attendance right now if you're good with that.
Thank you, Jared. Please do.
Bill Lamoureux.
Present.
Bill Doyle.
Here.
Chris McGuire.
Here.
Eric Nelson.
Here.
Ray Kane.
Here.
Suki Sawyer.
Here.
Shelley Edmondson.
Here.
Willie Goldsmith.
Here.
Ray Jarvis.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. So any other additions to today's meeting agenda? Hearing no one. We need the review and approval of the December 2025 draft business meeting minutes. Any edits? And we need a roll call on this, Jared.
We need a motion and a roll call.
Ray, it's Chris. I move that we accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Thank you.
Bill Amaru
Bill Amaru and
and Chris McGuire. Chris with the
Chris.
motion, Bill with the second.
I vote
Roll call. Bill Amaru,
yes, yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Eric Nelson,
Yes.
Ray Jarvis,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Willie Goldsmith.
Yes.
Thank you,
Believe
Jared.
that passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Office of Law Enforcement, Personnel, Recent Operations and Marine Fishery Incidents. Lieutenant Bass?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, we MEP has been involved with the tragedy of the Lily Jean. Giving some assets and efforts around to locating, assessing, and surveying the site. It's a difficult situation all the way around with the depth, the distance, and our current weather, but that is still an ongoing effort. Typically this time of year, it's all about whales. There was a flight yesterday over Cape Cod Bay, saw 37 ray whales, at least that many. We've been working pretty closely and seamlessly with DMF and some contract boats. I don't think there's a lot of gear out there, but what has been found is it's like we've been removing it pretty quickly. As far as I know, the previously entangled right whale that was more or less partially disentangled is yet to be relocated. So I don't know if there's any other assessment on that. For our personnel, Chairman, you asked at the Lobsterman Association conference a little more in-depth breakdown of what we have. So I just totaled up our total law enforcement staff. Currently, that's looking at 97. 9 of those officers are in the command staff in management. In the field, we have 82 officers. But to note, 6 of those, or at least 6 of them, are out for one reason or another and haven't been working for a year. So whether they're ever coming back or not, they still just take up place on our books. We are currently, we had been planning on hiring 8. That got whittled down to 6. I believe most of those 6 are previous police officers, so we're probably seeing a lot of new faces out there very soon. Where they're going to go or where they live, I have no idea, but definitely looking forward to getting 6 new people on the job. I have nothing further. If there's any questions.
Questions for Lieutenant Bass?
Suki.
Yeah, thanks,
Suki,
Chairman.
you're
Thanks, Ray.
recognized.
Just wondering what kind of presence you've been having out in P-Town as far as the draggers, land, and lobsters going out there. Hear a lot of grumbling at usual this time of the year. I was just wondering if you guys are doing more enforcement out that way or not.
Yep. Could have mentioned it. There was another fairly large seizure from a boat that was fishing in an area, an LMA1, so you'd have oversize and whatnot. That case is ongoing, both criminally and on the civil libel for the seizure of that catch. But those efforts are still ongoing.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so Lieutenant Bass, was that a recent seizure or was this the seizure from last winter?
It was the 16th of January.
Oh, it was this year then. Thank you very much. Questions for Lieutenant Bass?
Bill
Yes.
Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant Bass, I mean, the port of Provincetown's mentioned in this discussion. I want to be clear that the boats that are in violation that are landing in Provincetown are certainly not boats from the Provincetown fleet. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, for those that aren't familiar, there is a limitation on the number of lobsters a dragger or a offshore boat can land, 100 per day, no more than 500, and they're regulated by where they're fishing and where they're endorsed for. Kind of, I don't know, the loophole or what they take advantage of is if they have their limit of lobsters, they come in and land, and the closest port is typically P-Town. So they just land there, offload their lobsters, and then go back out to fish. But as to date, I don't believe any Provincetown or Cape vessel has been involved in any of these oversized over limit take of lobsters in federal waters.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Bill. Questions for Lieutenant Bass?
Not seeing any further hands raised, Mr. Chair.
So I'll put the question out there. We're down to 82 boots on the ground as far as enforcement is concerned?
That is correct right now, with 6, I think, within the next week coming on for training.
And the attrition this coming year?
Oh, good question. I know of at least 2 or 3 imminent retirements. They're likely to be 1 or 2 more, so we might just be treading water.
So thank you for that, Lieutenant Bass. I'll put it forward to the commission members as a time. Usually annually, I believe, Jared, we submit a letter to the governor requesting funding, more funding to get more boots on the ground for enforcement. Is it that time of the year, Jared?
If that is a task you want to put on me, I can have a letter drafted for one of the upcoming meetings.
Thank you. How do commission members feel about that? Do I need a motion on this, Jared, or we just?
We won't be able to vote on that because it's not on the agenda today, but if it's something that there's no objections to, I can move forward with it.
Hearing that, are there any objections to Jared?
Not here.
No objection.
Thank you.
Boots on the deck are always welcome.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Ray.
Oh, we appreciate the support. Thank you.
So if there's no more questions for Lieutenant Bass, we'll move on to Commissioner O'Shea, Department of Fish and Game.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Want to just also acknowledge that it's been pretty hard for the Gloucester community and the fishing community for sure, with the loss of the crew from the fishing vessel Lily Jean. I personally attended the memorial service with the families and then the funeral yesterday for Gus Sanfilippo, and I can tell you that for all those involved, it's been pretty heartbreaking to hear the families, their grief, and the loss of their loved ones as part of that crew. And I just want to call out that this is not, obviously, as you all know, this is pretty rare kind of event to take place, and it was particularly also difficult to lose an observer, which I think it may be the first time that's happened. And I met her family and the observer's family. So it was pretty painful time for everybody. I do want to mention that Safathia Romea-Feckin, our deputy commissioner, has done a lot to help the families and the community in general with both grieving but also relief. And I offered as well. I know the governor and Senator Bruce Tarr have offered to help in any way we can. Governor Healy was at the funeral yesterday, and along with Senator Bruce Tarr, and then along with Director Dan McKiernan, Story Reed, Bob Glenn, and myself. So I know, Ray, you wanted to make it as well. But we're just here for the fishing community, and just wanted to acknowledge that, and also our deputy commissioner. She's done a lot, and it's been tough. So if there's anything we can do, we can always follow up further on that. I do want to also welcome Willie Goldsmith. I think it's really a great addition to the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission to have Willie Goldsmith. I think many of you probably know he's been engaged both at the federal level and even the state level with fisheries management, whether it's with the U.S. Congress, NOAA Fisheries, the Regional Fisheries Management Councils, the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission, and even the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. So if you know Will, he's an avid angler himself. He's a Massachusetts native, and this has been an important part of both his personal and professional life. It's led him to pursuing a career in fisheries science and management. And So it was a great opportunity that Willie expressed an interest in joining us. He brings, I think both, the point of view of an independent fisheries manager and scientist, but he also is somebody who really cares about the fishing, both recreational and commercial. So anyway, and I think Willie, you've got a PhD in marine science from Virginia Institute. So they're just great addition to and rounding out our commission. So just want to again welcome Willie myself. Glad to have you. I also want to say that we had a good, I thought it was a good MLA meeting, the Massachusetts Lobstermen Association's meeting. For me, anyway, it was great to hear the status updates, to hear perspectives from people in MLA, the members. I got perspectives on ropeless gear and other things. And then there was a great presentation on our new derelict gear regulations and efforts to clean up derelict gear, ghost gear. And I think that was really good to see too. There was interest there. It was interesting to hear what Maine's been doing as well. But I thought it was a good meeting. I bought a shirt there in preparation for the New England Patriots game. It was for my son. It was called Crustacean Nation. So I thought that was pretty clever from MLA. Didn't help the Patriots win, but we certainly were there with MLA and Patriot spirit. And then I just want to call out, I don't think Bob Glenn's given a presentation yet, but he and the team doing a great job with developing designs and possible scope of services for investing in the Salem Cat Cove facility to be a marine habitat restoration center. And at some point, I think it'd be great for Bob to give you all an update on that. But he and the team with Mark Rousseau and others, really, I think it's exciting. I think it will really put DMF kind of in the top of the region in terms of marine habitat capability and capacity. And then lastly, I just want to say, as we get into the budget, process here, we're already in the middle of it now. It's going to be a tight year. And so I just want to kind of let you all know it's still working through the process, but it's tough. This is one of the tougher years. We are still in a hiring freeze. Until we reach a certain number of employees, we can't even hire. So, and we're not at that point yet. So this is, I'm just letting you know, it's going to be a tough year for DMF and all of us in some ways. So we'll make it work, but it'll be challenging. So not to end on a bad note, but overall, I think we're good though. I don't see any real issues, but it's going to be tight. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Questions for Commissioner O'Shea?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Also, on my behalf, I forgot to mention the awards presentation back in January for recreational fishermen, and I wanted to thank Eric Nelson for attending. He's the only commission member I saw there other than myself, but that was a good event. Thank you, Commissioner O'Shea, for attending, and of course, DMF staff, Dan McKiernan. It would be nice to see more commission members at that. That was an enthusiastic crowd, don't you think so, Commissioner O'Shea?
Yeah, I would say, Chairman, the Commissioner's Cup, I don't know if the commission members have seen what it looks like, but it was great. And it was really good energy. I thought Ben Gahagan did a fantastic job at being the MC and running the whole thing. And I thought the whole DMF team did great, but that Commissioner's Cup looks great.
Yes. Well, thank you for that event. Moving along, if there's no questions for the Commissioner, I'll move along to Director Dan McKiernan with his updates.
Thank you, Ray, and I'd like to thank the Commission for their flexibility, allowing us to have this meeting today, moving it off of yesterday's scheduled in-person meeting in light of the funeral for Gus Sanfilippo yesterday. What Tom and has already stated as and you as well, Ray. It's really tough. Gus was a former member of this commission for a brief period of time, and in the loss of the observer, too, for a lot of us on the government side, really hit home. But what really struck me about yesterday's event is the historic nature of it. I mean, we know Gloucester lost the Andrea Gale, and Gloucester lost the Italian Gold, and both of those were in the 90s, and so these things, as Tom said, don't happen very often, but it is so impactful because that crew and that set of seven, they were doing what makes Gloucester Gloucester. Gloucester is a fishing town, and when you die in the line of work, it really hits a chord because they were doing that which makes the city the city. And so having the governor there, added to sort of the gravitas of the moment for me. And I want to echo Tom's comments about Safathia. She's we all know her as really a colorful character, but she's so locked into the Gloucester community and helping us, better understand the community and make stronger contacts and connections. And then in a moment like that, it was really she was just a great asset to the department and to all of us. So thank you, Safathia. So on a more positive note, I've attended some really interesting meetings lately. I went to Moncton, New Brunswick a few weeks ago for what's called the U.S.-Canada Lobster Town Meeting put on by the Maine Lobster Institute. We make sure we attend because we don't want that meeting to be considered Canadian and Maine lobster meeting. So we do our best to show a presence. I served on a panel, and Tracy Pugh of our staff is on the planning committee for that meeting. Next year, this meeting is going to be in either Bar Harbor or Bangor, and we hope more U.S. fishermen will make the trip because it's on our side of the border. But the highlight for me at that meeting is always when the dealers get up on the stage and in the panel, and they talk about trends and what they've seen happening in the recent past and what they're sort of forecasting for the future, because these lobsters are really a commodity, and the prices are affected by international demand. And there was some really great explanations as to why prices seem to fall last fall, and also some prognostications for future demand and prices. The common theme is that the Canadian landings are rising. The U.S. landings are almost falling almost by the same amount. We're seeing more lobster production in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and off Newfoundland, higher than ever before, while our lobsters in southern New England are kind of petering out. So, U.S. used to land about half of the North American lobsters, and now we're at about a third. And so it's so important to understand what's going on the other side of the border. And many of those dealers have facilities on both sides of the border. And of course, in this time that we're in with tariffs and changing or capricious tariff arrangements, that it's even more complicated for some of those folks. So great meeting, and I will inform everybody next year. And if it'll be in Maine because they switch back and forth each year. So I think it'll be a great meeting for anyone interested in the lobster fishery to attend. Like Tom said, annual weekend at MLA. I think it was my 39th meeting. It's always a good time. We get a lot of great feedback from folks either at the booth. This year's seminar was sort of overfilled with information, and so we didn't have as much opportunity to have give and take. Believe me, we had plenty of give and take at the booth. So anyway, great event. Thank you to MLA for that. I want to point out you were mailed the federal court decision on the Outer Cape. They were asking for that lawsuit to be reopened from 1998, the judge turned them down, and the judge made some very definitive decisions on the case that we hope will help us in our state case, which is ongoing as well. We held 2 meetings this week up in our Gloucester office. The first one, we've been having group meetings to try to explain the ropeless fishing programs that are being conducted by the federal government, that is the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and DMF. The overlap of those 2 programs, it can be confusing. So we had a good conversation with many of the folks who were mainly North Shore folks, but were pretty confused about it. And then yesterday, we held a meeting with the scholars who are interested in taking part in that pilot program that we're going to operate later this month, or actually beginning next week, off of the North Shore into areas that have been previously closed to mobile gear, now that we don't have much in the way of lobster gear, except, of course, whatever ropeless fishing gear is being deployed. We brought them together. We brought those scholars together, most in the room, but some virtual, to talk about like how to coexist in the event that there is some of the rope gear that's present. And, this is a great test for that system. Ropeless gear can't be seen unless you're using some of this technology and these apps to locate the gear on your screen. And, this might make for a very nice little experiment. Not that it was our intent, but, this is an opportunity for us to examine the efficacy of the system going forward. The New England Council nominations are being developed based on applications received, and I believe each of you has received a request to review our draft recommendations that would go up through the administration for an eventual letter of recommendation to the Secretary of Commerce. And so I'd ask that, hold on, Kevin's giving me a headset here, because I guess I am garbled again. Stand by.
It might just be your internet, Dan.
Is that better? Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So anyway, we've got recommendation. We're drafting recommendations. We've got many applicants for these council seats. The 2 seats, the first one is held by Jackie Odell, who is seeking her 2nd term. And the other seat is held by John Pappalardo, who's terming out. It'll be his 3rd consecutive term. So he's ineligible to be reappointed. So in order to file nomination letters, you have to have at least 3 named candidates for each seat. Fortunately, we have that because we had a great response to the solicitation for applications. One of the things that we've favoring in our suggested nominees is some kind of reflection that the candidate is familiar with the council and has some dealings with the council. In other words, folks who attend the meetings or better yet, are involved as advisors. I think that gives the applicant a better understanding of what they're in for, because these council appointments, it's very challenging. And I don't think anybody would be well served to be totally ignorant of that, the level of commitment and sort of the nuances of participating as a council member. So that is one of the areas that we think would make a particular member's applicant's application stronger than another. So please take the time and get back to Kelly Whitmore before, I believe, tomorrow, if you could. We had a meeting scheduled yesterday with what's called the Coastal Caucus. It's all those legislators that have salt water in their districts. And we're going to talk about horseshoe crabs because of the recent bill that was filed to ban the bait quota. And we postponed yesterday's scheduled Coastal Caucus Zoom seminar or Zoom meeting because of the funeral. So we will reschedule that. We just want the legislators to understand our management scheme because it is complicated. It's complicated because we have two quotas. We have crossover between those quotas where some of the big quota is bled by the biomedical firms. And there's a lot of misinformation, I believe, out in the general public about the status of horseshoe crabs. So we thought we'd have an opportunity to talk to some of the legislators directly about our views of the status of that situation. On the Rec Derby Awards, Ray and Tom kind of hit on that, but one of the best parts of that event that we've done in recent years is invite the winners to tell their fish stories, and so it can be a lot of fun, and it's lighthearted, but it's pretty informative as well. I also want to announce that the Belding Award is going to be given, as we've already announced this because you voted on this, but it's going to be awarded on the 19th of March at the New Bedford office when the Mass Shellfish Officers Association is going to be convening, I believe, during their lunch hour. And so I know Bill Amaru, you're particularly interested in that. Henry Lind is the recipient, and he's very popular, and he's from down your way. So please put that on your calendar if you're interested in seeing the award given to Henry. Finally, there is a public hearing February 24th at the Mass Maritime Academy. Please put that on your agenda as well. I believe there'll be an opportunity to listen in if folks are unable to make the trip down to Buzzards Bay. But we don't have they're not hybrid options, but we'll use an owl so that you would be able to listen in and just hear the hearing from beginning to end. And then finally, today's agenda, there's going to be a number of presentations, but the one that you really need to focus on with particular detail is Nicola's on black sea bass because, and we'll describe this in more detail, that it's a very disjointed, or I should say a very compressed rulemaking schedule. So we need you today to give us strong signals about your preference about black sea bass liberalizations. We could go longer season, we could go smaller size, or we could go larger bags because we have a liberalization that's coming to us for the next 2 years. But you won't, we're going to have to file emergency regulations, I believe, by the end of March. So in order for us to send the options up to the ASMFC technical committee, we want today to know where your priorities are, and we can debate those. But it's really important that we get signals from you because we're not going to be able to run an unlimited number of options. They've begged us to keep it to a bare minimum. So anyway, so today's conversation is going to be about that. So why don't I stop there, let the meeting proceed. I can take any questions people may have.
Bill Amaru?
Thank
Bill
you, Jared.
Amaru, you're recognized, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would ask, Jared, if you wouldn't mind sending out an email blast to the commission on the Belding Award date and location as a reminder. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Bill. Questions for the director?
Chris McGuire.
Chris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the update, Dan. I enjoyed being at the MLA weekend a little bit. For a little while, I mean. I wanted to ask one question about that. I think that I heard Bob Glenn say that because of changing distributions of right whales and the entanglement, that there might be a conversation starting this year about the timing of the closure. And I was just curious if you could talk about what that process looks like? I don't want to talk about the substance, but I'm just curious about what the process looks like.
Well, I'll let Bob uh, take that, um, but there's two levels of potential response. One is the state, as a state, we can be more conservative than what federal regulations are, or even what the take reduction team is going to consider. But that take reduction team is not going to convene until the fall, and they're probably not going to be proposing anything sooner than 2029. That's when the Consolidated Appropriations Act um, pause ends on regulations. So yeah, we could take a state action, but as far as that event and new analyses, I believe Bob's expecting the take reduction team would be meeting in the fall of this year. So Bob, why don't I let you take a shot at this, and I'll come in if comments after.
Yeah, sounds good, Dan. Thanks. And thanks, Chris. Yeah, so a couple of things is Dan's correct. The Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team is scheduled to initiate rulemaking in November of 2026, starting with in-person meetings. And so that's the formal federal process. As you all know, there's a pause on all federal rulemaking, any new rules going into place, rather, until December 31st of 2028. But it's NOAA Fisheries' intention to have potentially new risk reduction rules in place by the end of 2028, so they can be implemented immediately in 2029. Hence the start to working on development of those now. Internally, yeah, Dan's on point. We could certainly do additional rulemaking. What I want to do with my team is, what we presented at the MLA show was some acoustic data from our two real-time buoys. We have one in Cape Cod Bay and one in Massachusetts Bay up off of Cape Ann. And that's, what it's showing is that we're seeing fairly substantial numbers of right whales in Cape Cod Bay throughout December and January, and that'll causes us to look at that information and kind of reconcile what the risk is to right whales relative to what we have for fishing gear out there at that time. What I'd like to be able to do before jumping the gun just based on those two data sources is incorporate a full analysis and look at, in addition to those two real-time buoys, we have 17 archival buoys that the team has done retrieval for, I think, 2 quarters at this point. We have the data in hand, but the acoustic data processing takes a long time. The team is working on that. In addition to that, we've ramped up aerial surveillance. So what I'd like to do over this coming winter and spring, throughout the summer, is take a full look at all of that data, both the real-time buoys, the archival acoustic buoys, our aerial surveillance data, as well as our fishing effort data, overlay those and really get us a better sense of the risk landscape before making any recommendations. As you indicated, Chris, we did have an entanglement in Massachusetts fishing gear in Cape Cod Bay in January. That's obviously a concern and one that we need to examine and look at the risk landscape. But so process wise, that would be it. Is where we need to really look at all the data, and from there, just decide how to proceed.
And Chris, I would just like to follow up on Bob, just to say that we also need to examine the entanglement itself to see if there's anything about the event or the gear or the seasonality of that fishing by that individual. And there's an ongoing investigation as to just where exactly what kind of gear it was in. So that may be useful as well. But mostly it's going to be Bob's data that he just described that's going to be most valuable, which is the presence, absence, and the relative densities. And who know? I mean, I was kind of surprised to see whales here as early as they are, but we've had at least 30 on numerous occasions all through January, which
I think it's a little bit early, but you know, the acoustic monitors, they don't lie. So we'll see. Thanks for that question, and we'll work to keep you informed on that.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Are you good, Chris?
Yep, all set.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Dan. Questions for the director?
Not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
I have one question, Dan. I don't know how often the Coastal Caucus meets, but we have an issue down in the southeast section of Massachusetts that's called ice in the harbors. And I know you wanted to discuss horseshoe crabs at the Coastal Caucus. Could there be mention of the icing conditions and the lack of fishing days? Because of the icing conditions, the vessels can't get out. Is that a place?
I don't think so, Ray. I mean, these are state regulators. I'm sorry, state legislators. I'm struggling to figure out what they could do that DMF can't. I mean, we have a lot of regulatory discretion. You mean like supporting new changes at NOAA Fisheries? I mean, what?
No. Like bringing in icebreakers.
Oh.
I don't know. I don't know
Hmm.
what it's like on the North Shore with the different harbors, but I know down here the fishing fleet is very limited. So I was just wondering if that could be mentioned.
Sure. Yeah.
To put it on the radar. Like this seems to occur once every 10 years, but I think the state legislators should be made aware of it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, we can follow up on that, Ray.
Thank you, Dan. Questions for the director?
Bill Doyle?
Yeah.
Bill, you're recognized.
Yeah, on the ice, a bunch of us, together with the town, put in a request to have an icebreaker come in and open up the harbor. Last time we did that was in 2018. But anything that could add to the legitimacy of our request. You know, they were asking questions like, well, are you just going to move your boat down to Sandwich, or are you going to go fishing every day? And so I don't know, maybe getting DMF, requesting a letter from DMF or a phone call to Coast Guard Station Boston in the future might help.
Thank you, Bill. Questions for the director?
Not seeing any further hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director McKeon. And let's move along to future emergency regulations. First one up is Atlantic mackerel, recreational bag limits.
I think Melanie's going to take this.
I am. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
I'm just going to wait. There's one slide that I have for you all, but while Jared's getting that up, so Atlantic mackerel management has been pretty quiet, right, since the Commonwealth first adopted a recreational bag limit of 20 fish, and we began requiring a commercial endorsement to possess over that limit. We did that in 2023 after 2021 stock assessment concluded inadequate rebuilding was occurring. So now, 5 years later, we have a new stock assessment that's shown an increase in recruitment for 2024. And this supported a decision by the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council to revise its rebuilding plan. They're still aiming for a 2032 rebuild date. And consequently, that allowed for an increase in the acceptable biological catch. So in light of their SSC, their Science and Statistical Committee approved quota increase, the MID decided to increase the recreational and commercial limits, that would be appropriate. So bringing that back to the Commonwealth, the division's proposing to match those limits for state waters. Historically, our commercial limit matches the federal commercial open access permit limits. And at the top of the slide, you can see the proposed actions. So for recreational, there would be an increase in the private recreational limit from 20 to 25 fish. For hire, there would be an increase in the recreational limit from 20 to 50 fish. So we would now have split modes. And for the commercial, there would be a tiered increase in the limit based on the amount of the federal quota, what's known as the domestic annual harvest that remains. So it would start with a 20,000 pound trip limit. This is a 15,000 pound increase from the current 5,000 pound starting limit. And then when 1,100 metric tons of the federal commercial quota remains, it would drop to 5,000 pounds. And then it would drop to the final incidental trip limit when 220 metric tons of the quota remains. And so that would be 2,500 pounds. As I said, the rationale for this revised rebuilding plan led to higher acceptable biological catch. And we have traditionally matched our commercial limits with the open access trip limit. So that would all make this consistent. In terms of timing, federal timing aims for a May 1 implementation. So based on that pretty quick timeline, DMF would need to use emergency action to complement. So the plan is we would take emergency action to implement these rules by May 1. I would note maybe or as soon as the feds finalize rulemaking, because it has been continued to be delayed on the federal side lately. So I think our overall aim would just be to complement when that happens. Then after emergency action, we would follow up with public hearings, and a final proposal for state rulemaking would be considered sometime in May or June by the commission. And that is a really quick overview of what we're proposing. And with that, I can take any questions.
Questions for Melanie?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Oh, you guys are letting me off easy. Yes.
Melanie, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
With forage fish, I mean, all our other species, we have size limits and bag limits. And I see we have bag limits once again for mackerel. But we don't have any size limits on forage fish. Has the council ever thought about implementing size limits?
I don't know historically, but yeah, you're right. There are no size limits. We're going to be, I shouldn't say we, the council. I mean, all the councils right now, they've been responding to a lot of executive orders, and one of those is to respond to basically reduce science and management capacity. I would rather term that, to optimize our management strategies in light of where we are with resources. And so I mentioned that in response to your question, because I think there's going to be a lot more talk about ecosystem component species, and I would imagine the forage species would be discussed under that. So there will be opportunities maybe for that discussion to come up, Ray, as that proceeds.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions for Melanie?
Not seeing any hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Melanie. It was a very good presentation. And this is coming out of the Mid-Atlantic, right?
Correct. They are the managing council, so they've already taken their actions. This is being forwarded to NIMS, so they've approved it. We're waiting for federal implementation. So now it's just up to the states to, especially on the recreational side, to take either complementary action or do what they see fit.
Thank you, Melanie. Update on potential 2026 recreational black sea bass limits. I presume Nicola's going to take this.
I am. Good morning, everyone. Let's see.
Nick, you can share.
Yep, one moment. How's that look? Good?
Very good.
Wonderful. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead. The first part of this update really is to focus on black sea bass. So as I informed the commission at a prior meeting back in December, the ASMFC and the Mid-Atlantic Council approved a 20% coastwide harvest liberalization for recreational black sea bass that would be implemented in 2026, and then the measures held status quo for 2027. The next part of that decision is to determine how that 20% increase is distributed among the three recreational regions for black sea bass management, which is Mass through New York, New Jersey as a standalone region, and Delaware through North Carolina. This was the first time that the commission had to make this type of determination. It's the first time that we've had a liberalization since this approach was written into the management plan. And so based on a number of factors, including trends in regional harvest, higher release rates, and generally speaking, lower angler satisfaction in the northern region, and management history and the regulations that are rather disparate between the regions. We were able to negotiate for the northern region last week a 27% increase, allowed increase of harvest, and then 16.5% for the southern region, and the remainder would be going to New Jersey, which is estimated to be somewhere in the 16 to 18% range. It's an estimate there because the modeling approach that is used, you have to put all the measures in at the same time and determine how the interplay before you can assign a specific amount to that last region. So that was you know, a pretty good outcome that gives us a little bit more room to consider different management measures within the northern region. We are still at a step now where we need to negotiate within our region how we collectively, our four states, utilize that 27% increase. And so it is, as Dan mentioned, a rather truncated schedule to do this. We have until next Wednesday to submit some regional options. No more than 5 for the region is what's been requested to the ASMFC. There would then be some time for the ASMC staff to run all the different regional configurations together to make sure that they're not exceeding the 20% overall, make any final tweaks that may be needed. And then there would be an ASMC board meeting on March 5th to review and consider approving the range of options from the regions. And then we would have until April 1st to inform the ASMSC of the measures that we've selected and are in the process of implementing. So, given the schedule, that's why we're proceeding with emergency rulemaking to have those measures in place by May 1st, and are looking for your input today on kind of our planned approach for negotiations within our region. To inform that process, we did conduct scoping last month, and as part of that, put out a survey with a couple of questions asking for management preferences that garnered close to 900 responses. The slides from the scoping hearing, which was held virtually, were provided in your meeting materials, and it had some good information that shows some trends about our harvest and catch in Massachusetts, and also some of the preliminary results from that survey. So a couple of things that we heard overall was the importance of maintaining the May 16th, a Saturday start, just one day up from our current start date of May 17th. So the importance of that start date to the for-hire fleet. When it was discussed as to the potential of starting the Saturday after that, it was pretty unanimous that, that measure was the most important thing, and that it would be a huge economic loss to cancel a week's worth of trips that come at the beginning of the season and are a real economic driver at the beginning of the season. Within the survey results, we asked a question about, a management priority, if you could increase the season, decrease the size limit, or increase the bag limit, which of those would be the highest priority? And overall, the highest priority was a season extension into September and October. One interesting split there was that among individuals that um, said they take party and charter boats as their primary mode, among those individuals, decreasing the size limit was a slightly eked out the season extension. So you'll see here that those are two things that we're kind of focusing on for the changes. We did so. There was a question that asked about how far into September and October you would go fishing if the season were open, and there was a lot of interest to be open all of that. There was some questioning at the scoping hearing, whether that effort would really materialize, and so is it worth using part of the allowed liberalization to get all the way through October? So we did try to do a little bit of ground truthing by looking at the number of intercepts, MRIP intercepts that our contracted staff are doing in that time of year, and we do see pretty steady effort at some sites that we looked at that we thought would be representative of black sea bass fishing, and a lot of steady effort throughout September, and a larger decline in that effort happening until not until mid-October. So it does seem from this data that we could likely still that extending into September would provide some real benefits, and even October 15 if we could manage to do that as part of the regulation change. Also, we asked a question about whether or not a half-inch size limit reduction would be a meaningful change, and a majority did support that. Reducing the minimum size and increasing the season length will be the two things that can reduce discards for us the most, and that was a major reason that at the ASMSC level, I believe that the region was afforded a larger increase is to help reduce the discards, which collectively, reduce the recreational harvest limit for all participants in the fishery. So with that, we did know that reducing the size limit by just half an inch would be about an 11% liberalization for Massachusetts. So we think that that's more doable now that the northern region does have this larger increase, not just the 20, but the 27%. And we also asked a question about, when in the season you would prioritize a higher bag limit. Kind of not surprisingly, that was May and June, and we do see in the MRIP data that there are a lot of trips that limit out in May and June at 4 fish, whereas later on into July and August, most trips are just taking 1 or 2 fish. And among the responses about management preferences, increasing the bag was the lowest priority within the survey results. We did hear some additional interest at the scoping meeting about increasing the bag once we showed some preliminary analysis that it would be a relatively small use of the allowed increase to go up in the bag limit. So that's just a little bit of a summary of the results. I hope everyone had a chance to kind of look at the slides that were provided in advance of this meeting, though, to get some more details. So based on these kind of survey results and the scoping comments, our intentions moving forward on developing options and working within the region, we thought that we would prefer to begin the season on May 16th and try to achieve a closing date of at least September 30th. We are interested to consider the half-inch size reduction and then evaluate the trade-offs to the bag and the season. So that's what we've been looking at over the last couple of days, trying to come up with a range of options to look at here today. And this table kind of shows what we are thinking is the best path forward, looking at whether or not to include that 16.5-inch minimum size of status quo or reducing it by the half-inch. That's how this table is broken down. And so if we don't reduce the minimum size, we have some more flexibility of options of how to get through September or maybe October 15th. And so we looked at, just a simple approach of keeping a 4-fish bag throughout the season, You can get to the end of September with a 27% increase for Massachusetts. So we think that's something that we would be able to negotiate within our region. Might be able to get a little bit more and go to October 15th. We also looked at some split bag approaches where the bag limit starts higher in May for the beginning part of the season, and even goes to 5 fish for that first part based on that interest that was expressed about getting back to 5 fish for at least part of the season. And so these options look at the May through August period being at 5 fish and then going to 2 fish for September to October 15th, or using a 5 fish and then 3 fish approach. Having that extra fish for the second half of the season would likely necessitate the drop in the bag limit occurring on July 1st as opposed to September 1st, though. So you can see how that kind of shakes out and gives you projected harvest for Massachusetts that are pretty close to that 27% that we are thinking would kind of be our minimum within our region. However, if we looked at the 16-inch size limit, which again, with the season extension, would do the most for reducing our discards and increasing harvest opportunities, and would be our preferred approach here if we can get a little bit more within the negotiations of the region, would result in a May 16th to June 30 season at 4 fish, and then July 1 to September 30 at 2 fish. So at 16 inches, that's a 31% increase. If we could eke out a little bit more within the region, we know we might be able to include through October 15th, or we might be able to include the 5 fish bag limit for the beginning of the season. But that is what that kind of looks like with the 16-inch minimum. And I'm just going to finish this last part, Dan, and then turn to you. So we largely are seeking your support at this meeting to prioritize that 16-inch approach, assuming that we could get a little bit more within the region and at least get through September 30th. It would be our goal to try to negotiate for a little bit more and get into either October or get the 5 fish for the beginning of the season start. There's a question there if only one of those was possible, which the commission would prefer that we prioritize. And then if we can't within the region, eke out a little bit more than a 27% increase, and we needed to stay at the 16.5-inch size limit, which of the kind of the bag and season combinations would there be preference for? So Dan, did you want to add to that introduction?
No, great. Yes, and great job. I just want to have you speak to the commission about, I think you're being a little euphemistic when you say eke out more than a 27% increase. Our regulations, we believe, are more conservative than some of our neighboring states within the Northeast, the New York to Massachusetts area. So I think that's our challenge, is to convince some of one or more of those states to not get their full 27%, arguing some theme of fairness that our regulations historically have just been too conservative. Can you speak to that?
Yes. So I think that if I could, if I had the regional kind of regulations on a slide here, and it is in the scoping slides that you were sent. It shows that Connecticut, for example, has a lower size limit, higher bag, and longer season compared to the other states in the region. So there is language in the FMP that says when the region is allowed to liberalize, states with more liberal regulations should have a lesser increase or perhaps even stay status quo. So that is the type of negotiation that we need to perform within our region now, where maybe one state would have less than 27% of an increase, and it would be what they leave on the table kind of is provided to the other states. I think Rhode Island and New York, while they have some disparity when it comes to their comparison to Connecticut as well. So all of that kind of remains to be done, but there is, some interest if we can to maybe try to get to a common minimum size to have similar season lengths, or at least provide for a little bit more equity within in that. So the negotiation is definitely going to be a part about, how do we improve the equity of the regulations within the region as well.
Thank you, Nicholas. So kudos to you and Ray for the negotiations at the ASMFC board. And so now the next round of negotiations is among your group of Northeast states. And I'm using New York as part of that group. So just want the commission to understand sort of the sequencing of how sort of we're negotiating these outcomes. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Nicola. Questions for Nicola?
Willie Goldsmith.
Willie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nicola, for that presentation and kind of laying out the state of play here and the multiple layers of discussion that need to happen. I think I have more of a process question than input on the exact measures here, but just to make sure I understand and recognizing the compressed time frame. I believe kind of the major change since the hearing on January 20th has been the availability of MRIC Wave 5 data. And just curious, as we look at these numbers, do these incorporate that data from last September and October for black sea bass? Just curious if the projections or the data here is going to align with what the ASMFC does, as I imagine, will use that Wave 5 data in their modeling and projections on a region-wide level. Thanks.
It does not. The model that is, we use a modeling approach at this point to project the change in harvest and discards from the change in measures. And so that model cannot be updated in a super timely basis to incorporate the Wave 5 data. So the model uses 2 years worth of data, but it kind of goes from mid 2023 to mid 2025, not including Wave 5 from last year.
Are you good, Willie?
Yeah, that's helpful. I might just take a peek at that most recent data. Just curious if it deviates at all from what went on maybe in 2024, just to understand kind of what the effort looked like last year and how it might compare.
Thank you, Nicola. Questions for Nicola?
Bill Amaru.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Nicola. Very informative. I'm wondering, what's the difference, and this is based on the bottom of the chart that says seeking MFAC support for 16-inch approach. What's the difference in the fecundity rates between 16-inch fish, 16.5-inch fish when it comes to their spawning levels? Is there a substantial difference in that half inch of additional growth?
I mean, you're looking at a similar aged fish. It's going to have to do with age. I don't know if I can answer that, but the main interest in reducing the minimum size would be a reduction in discards.
Yeah, I agree. And that would make a substantial difference, because it's amazing how many fish fit in that half-inch slot that go back. Of course, we're all looking for the biggest fish we can catch in a given day, but sometimes you just don't see 17, 18, 19-inch fish, and you see a lot of 16-inch fish. So yeah, I don't know how much discussion needs to have on that, but of what I'm looking at here in this chart, there's what I think you do the best approach for the industry, or for the recreational sector, I should say. So I would have no problem supporting it.
Yeah, one thing I would add about the discards is that within the last couple years, the assumed dead discards in Massachusetts have outpaced harvest, and so that is a trend that we would like to reverse with these rule changes if we can.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea, because I don't think I've ever seen one go back that didn't swim away faster than I could reel them in. Okay.
A 15% release mortality rate is used for black sea bass on a coastwide basis. Given the shallower water depths of a lot of our fishery, perhaps that might be an overestimate, but that's what's used on the coastwide basis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Questions for Nicola?
Eric Nelson?
Eric, you recognized.
Thank you very much. Great job, Nicola, on the presentation. I attended the public hearing virtually, listened in and so forth, and I heard some compelling arguments about reducing the size limit as we've been discussing down to 16 inches. And it seems like a good measure to reduce the discards. Anytime you have a lot of discards, it just doesn't make sense. And I also know a lot of the other states have much smaller size limits. So I guess I'm not sure what the downside would be for us to change to 16 inches.
Right. I mean, the only downside is that you're giving up your ability to change the other measures. But if we want to prioritize a size limit reduction, and I think there's a possibility that that might realign the northern region. I think there's some benefit to that as well. But it is still going to be quite the disparity between New York and New Jersey. New Jersey has a 12.5-inch minimum size. So there's still going to be, anglers that are frustrated with that border differential. But if we can align with Rhode Island and Connecticut, New York, that would provide some benefits.
Are you good, Eric? Follow up? No? Thank you. Questions for Nicola?
Ray Jarvis.
Ray, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nicola, for the presentation. I think 16 inches makes sense as far as discard mortality rate goes. But I would like to see an extension of the season. I've spoken to a lot of anglers who really would like to see that season extend into October if possible. September 30th is definitely an improvement. I know during that public meeting there was some comments saying that a lot of the guys do not see people targeting black sea bass in the fall, but I would beg to differ with that. And I think that a lot of anglers, especially down in my region, feel that they're kind of missing out a little bit, whereas a lot of Rhode Island anglers are able to land those fish in the fall, and just a few miles over to the east, we're subject to different rules there. So I know there is a lot of interest in extending that season. So, I'd like to see that extended as long as possible. October 15th ideally would be beneficial over, the 5 fish bag limit. So I would definitely prioritize extending that season. And I definitely do understand the 16-inch approach. I've spoken to a number of anglers who feel that they're throwing fish back all day and it's hard for them to get over that 16.5-inch mark. And it definitely makes sense for the species as well. So those are my comments, and thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, Ray.
Hey, Ray, this is Dan. Would it be possible for staff to put the table up that shows the matrix of recreational measures by state? I think that would be really enlightening.
Yes, please do.
Is that a Jared assignment?
I don't have
I'm
that.
working on it.
Oh,
One
Nicholas got
sec.
it. Okay.
Nicola.
I think I can get us to that. Um, there we go.
So we're looking at the northern region from Massachusetts through New York.
Nicola,
Right.
do you want to, what's not immediately apparent to the eye is the closures that I think Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York have. But right, so Rhode Island doesn't open
Until June 18th for their for hire.
Right.
they start with two fish. The one common theme between Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York is they start with lower bag limits and then go to the higher bag limit in the fall. We are interested in, the opposite approach under the split bag approach of starting with the higher bag limit and then reducing it in the fall. So we do differ from the region in that. I think here you can see how Connecticut has those more favorable regulations as a starting point. They do have a mid-season closure that I think it would make sense for that to be removed for the state at a minimum. So that would use up a little bit of the 27%. New York seems to be most interested in reducing the bag limit. I'm sorry, reducing the size limit based on their release rate is the highest within the region. And that's what they heard from their anglers in a similar survey that they conducted about changes in measures. And they also don't start until June 23rd. So each state is coming up with a few options that we need to get on the phone later this week and decide what we're going to try to run within the model to have it be within the 27%.
Nick, just to follow up, are, are you, for the commission's edification, it seems like the states would like a common minimum size. And so as you work together as a group, for example, Connecticut's not talking about going down from 16. I think everybody is trying to reach that common size. Is that a fair assessment?
15.5 has been talked about a lot. It just might not be possible with the 27% increase. Other than that, yes, we're talking about a common 16-inch size limit. But I think there is more interest in that from, from New York primarily, based on their angler survey and, the border that they share with New Jersey.
Willie Goldsmith.
Questions? Willie, you're recognized.
Pardon me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to echo what Ray was saying regarding, I think that the second line there in that red text on the other slide about moving to a 16-inch as a way to reduce discards, and then also again kind of create some equity and uniformity across the states. I also agree with the idea of an extended season to October 15th versus trying to look for 5 fish in that earlier part of the split season. A couple of reasons for that. One, to Ray's point about targeting black sea bass, but then of course also bycatch in a lot of the tautog fishing that's already going on around that time. The other thing is not looking at the model. I imagine the 5 fish bag might be. I imagine that might lead to, maybe higher levels of effort, but certainly a little bit more risky in terms of the amount of harvest that might bring to bear in May and June when there's a lot of directed black sea bass effort. So I guess I would voice support for that 16-inch minimum size combined with that extending of a season to October 15th versus the increase in backing to 5.
Kelly Edmondson.
Kelly, you're recognized.
Thanks, Ray. My question was kind of answered, but I was mostly interested in our neighboring states and their interest in reducing their size limit, and if you thought that they would all go down to 16, like Rhode Island and New Hampshire. But then I know you just mentioned that a 15.5-inch size limit was also in discussion. So I guess my point was, I think that matching or being on the same page for that is probably important because of our proximities. But anyway,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that having not had another conversation within the region yet, I do think that all of us looking at 16-inch would be one of the options that is kind of like the starting point of that option, and then each state sees what else they can do with the bag in the season. And then I suspect that some of the states within the region are looking at whether or not it's possible for them to get to 15.5 by making other concessions to their bagger season.
Mhm.
For Massachusetts to get down to 15 and a half is a 24% increase, so that would not leave us much wiggle room, to also get the season extension. So that's why I haven't really focused on 15 and a half for Massachusetts.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Questions for Nicola? Thank you, Shelley.
Not seeing any further hands, Mr. Chair.
So I have a question for Nicola. Nicola, we really don't have landings beyond what, September 4th in previous years, September 6th.
Right. We've
So,
been ending the first, we've only had a couple days in September for the number of years now.
and it's also mentioned, for a season extension, which I support. What is the drop-off rate from September 30th, followed up by October? What's the drop-off rate on intercepts and people talking about black sea bass in October?
Right. So, I mean, if you looking at just MRIP data, we do see that there are a lot of releases in September, October. Sometimes the most releases are coming from wave 5 compared to um, the other waves. And then the other data that I was talking about, Ben Cahagan was looking at just not MRIP estimates, but just MRIP intercepts, and just looking at effort to understand, you know, how much general angler effort declines in wave 5, to try to understand, how much of September and October should we prioritize trying to get. So because MRIP estimates are in 2-month waves currently, I don't know that I can say for sure, where that catch drops off for black sea bass. But it does seem that the model, has a lower catch rate in October than September, but more fine than on that month basis. That the model doesn't include more discrete information than catch rates on a monthly basis.
Thank you. Questions for Nicola? So I guess this goes back to Dan. You have in red, seeking support from MFAC, but also Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important that we get a clear signal, and I think we've gotten it here, that the commission, by and large, supports us trying to chase down a half-inch size limit reduction, especially if it can be done uniformly with the other states. It's especially appealing. I think the commission wants to see a season extension, which we do as well. And so those two are our priorities. And then something we haven't done before that I'm in favor of is changing the bag limit seasonally. I think we've heard from folks that come July, August, September, October, 2 fish may be sufficient. And if that helps us get a little bit more season, breaking that bag limit rule seasonally with beginning on July 1st, cutting the bag limit in half. Um, I, I'm going to assume that there'll be some support from the commission here for that, especially if it means we'll be able to get later in the season. So is there any objection to us prioritizing those items or giving Nicola that advice as she enters into this next round of negotiations with the other states? Nick, those are the right questions, right?
Yes, yeah, and then also I think any input on if we stayed at 16 and a half inches, um, what do we still want to take, the split bag approach or a constant bag that would have less season. I think I'm hearing there is that the season extension would be prioritized over increasing the bag from 4 fish at any particular time. And what we see in the, as I said before, what we see in the MRIP estimates is that beginning July 1, most anglers are taking 1 or 2 fish, some 3, less 4. So I think there's, rationale for that bag drop to occur as early as July 1.
Dan?
Yeah, so if the commission has no objections to us making those the priorities going into the next round of negotiations among the Northeast states, then we've accomplished our job today. We're trying to be fully transparent, because what's going to happen is we're going to come back with an approved set of rules, and it's going to be very difficult for us to say, hey, why don't you check out this derivation on the combination. We would like to be able to proceed with some confidence that the commission will back us up, because when we enact an emergency regulation in April, I guess, we have to print all of our recreational information. People need to be able to make fishing plans, and there'll be one final vote on the emergency regulations to make them final, but we certainly couldn't deviate beyond what we had already enacted as a first emergency, because it would run counter to what we had printed in our guide. So a lot of this is, Nicola mentioned, is truncated, but there's some real practical issues about getting the word to the general public about what our rules are going to be for the upcoming season.
So, question, Dan. We have a number of new members to the commission. Could you explain to them emergency action as opposed to, Nicola
Yep.
Coming up with a plan and going back out to public hearing? And can you explain that?
Yeah, these annual specifications that are done for black sea bass, scup, and fluke, not every species it needs a change on an annual basis, but when changes are needed, we usually get our marching orders in the winter, and there isn't enough time to accomplish a normal rulemaking process, which usually, as folks know, takes 5 to 6 months to go from a proposed rule to a final rule. And so we use emergency regulatory authority that's been established in state law, and it requires the director's signature, the commissioner's signature, approval from above, above the commissioner, of course. And it's good for 90 days. And within the 90-day period, we are obligated to hold a public hearing and then have this commission formally vote on that. So you don't get a vote on the first one, but what we try to do through meetings like this is to gain consensus about what the combination of rules will be, so that when we come to you with a final regulation, maybe in July, even though the rule was enacted in time to open the fishery, it was opened with emergency authority, which evaporates after 90 days. So we need to sort of finish the year, we need to make that a final reg. So we're asking for sort of the upfront support on these, so that when we enact an emergency regulation, the commission doesn't say, wait, you did what? So that's sort of the theme of all of this.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan on his thoughts, his explanation?
Not seeing any further hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Well, I would like to thank Nicola for a great presentation. And my only concern, Nicola, is we're coming together as a region, as we have for a number of years now. And my concern, when our plan for the northern region goes back to ASMFC, that there's one particular region that might try to, how do I say this politely, throw a wrench in the spoke of the wheel. But that being said, I guess we can move on. Discussion items or this biological break, 5 minutes. How's everybody feel about that?
Sounds
We'll get
good.
that posted, Mr. Chair.
5 minute break. Thank you and welcome back. Thank you and welcome back. I'd like to reconvene the meeting. And there are no more further questions for Nicola nor Dan on black sea bass. So let's move on to discussion items. Interstate Fisheries Management update.
Okay, we are gonna go back to the same presentation 1 second. And this is going to be recapping the ASMC winter meeting, other than black sea bass. And then also there was a meeting yesterday between the commission and the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. But the first slide will actually start with lobster, so I will turn to either Bob or Dan for that.
Yeah, that'll be me, Nicola. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to give a very brief update of the winter meeting last week with the ASMC Lobster Board. Primary focus of the meeting was to hear from both the American Lobster Technical Committee as well as the Jonah Crab Technical Committee to give us data time series updates in between the stock assessments. As you're aware, the most recent lobster stock assessment was just provided this past fall, and the board had tasked the TC to give that assessment included data through 2024, and so the board had tasked the TC to provide updates on recruitment and abundance trends from our data time series through 2025, and that was given. And similarly, there were updates given by the Jonah Crab Technical Committee in between assessment updates. The last benchmark assessment for Jonah crabs was in 2023. Essentially, what we heard for lobsters was that all the time series indicate that conditions for the stock were similar to what were found in the assessment, which was just this fall. The stock for the Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank, as you know, is not overfished, and overfishing is slightly occurring out at the third decimal place. But the updates that the TC provided basically show that conditions are similar relative to abundance and recruitment trends, with maybe some slight leveling off or improvement in recruitment trends in some areas, to give a little bit of a hint of optimism that the recent declines in recruitment that we've seen have mediated a little bit and hopefully are going to be on the upswing. For Jonah crabs, this is a data poor species, and it's a little bit difficult to really get an indicator, but the TC provided us with updates of the time series that they have. The landings and effort trends are a little bit difficult to interpret for Jonah crabs because market conditions really drive a lot of the effort considerations and effort trends rather in landings trends as a result of that. Demand for and processing capacity really has a fair amount of influence on markets for Jonah crabs, and so as a result of that, we see trends in landings that aren't necessarily indicative of stock conditions. Overall, though, the TC looked at what trends that data they did have, and at this time, things look to be fairly stable based on what we have, and they did not recommend any additional management actions at this point. Another primary task at this lobster board meeting was kind of reconciling what to do next. What are the next steps for the lobster management relative to the results of the stock assessment? And so there are a couple considerations. One of the discussion items is talking about stock statuses. I think there's, based on the assessment results, the bigger concerns for the lobster stock and for the lobster fishery aren't so much that the stock conditions are in bad conditions. It's what are the socioeconomic concerns for this fishery moving forward if the stock continues to remain at these lower levels. And that was kind of the focus of the discussion. Along those lines, the Lobster Board tasked the TC to develop possible biological reference points that account for changing environmental conditions and stock productivity, and to include those in the next benchmark assessment. Essentially what this does is right now the reference points that we have are based on abundance indicators and looking at kind of three different stanzas within the data time series, looking at different levels of stock productivity, but they're not based on more traditional biological reference points that look at things like, F at maximum sustainable yield or biomass at maximal sustainable yield, or some percent reproductive capacity like F10 or F40%. The TC has looked at these in the past, and for lobster, there's mixed results in using them because there's a fair amount of uncertainty in some of the biological parameters that the population vital rates that go into the stock assessment. But nonetheless, given the kind of the non-static nature in the Gulf of Maine of environmental conditions and the influence that has on these vital rates, I think that the Lobster Board would like to see what the potential is to incorporate some of this environmental uncertainty and how that relates to stock productivity, so that it tasks the TC to do that. In addition to that, another consideration that the board considered was at the TC's recommendation. The TC had recommended that the next steps in lobster management really would benefit from a management strategy evaluation. And I think the board is open to that to some extent, but at first wants to really kind of investigate what and look at what the management goals are and objectives are for the future of the stock. As I mentioned, many of the concerns for that stock isn't necessarily biological. It's more about the socioeconomic conditions of the fishery. And along those lines, I think many of the board members thought it was important to really first be, as a first necessary step before going into a management strategy evaluation, is to really identify what those goals and management objectives are for the stock. And so with that, the board moved to form a steering committee that will be comprised of technical members from the Lobster Technical Committee, as some board members, and ample representation from across the lobster fishing community, to basically sit down and collectively, preferably with some moderators and facilitators involved, to develop some hard management goals and objectives for the future, and that this would serve as kind of the first necessary step for a management strategy evaluation. And so with that, that's all I have, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for Bob?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Bob, one question for me. We're talking about putting a steering committee together. How long will it be before we see a management strategy evaluation?
That's a good question, Ray. I don't know the exact timeline. I from my preference is that we move to get this steering committee together quick, and I think one of the first jobs of that committee is defining a timeline. But I have obvious concerns, and I don't want this to just linger indefinitely. I'd like to see movement on these actions, and so that by the next assessment, we're not all shrugging our shoulders as to what direction we need to head in. But my hope is that we would be able to, within the next year at least, or 8 to 18 months, be able to have some fairly well-defined management goals and objectives.
And that was the only thing that the TC really recommended to us, that they would like to see an MSE prior to the next assessment in 2030?
That's a good, yes, Ray, that's correct. I don't know the exact, I don't have the schedule for the next, but, scheduled benchmark stock assessment for lobsters. So I'd have to confirm with Tracy on the date of that. But yes, that sounds about right.
Thank you, Bob. Questions for Bob Glenn?
Bill Ammer.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, maybe I missed this in the discussion. For the steering committee, who are the members that are going to be asking any of the industry to participate in this?
So the good question, Bill. So this would be, I would assume it would be each of the states would reach out to the industry members to join and sit on this steering committee, and so that this would have representation from DMF, probably in the, like someone like myself, probably technical representation, someone like Tracy, and then we would reach out to members of the lobster fishery to represent both interest in Area 1, Area OCC, and Area 3, who are part of that Gulf of Maine Georges Bank stock.
Great.
We haven't discussed the ultimate size of the membership, so I don't know how many members, but it would be important for us to get representation from each of those areas at a minimum.
Very good. That's what I was expecting, and I'm very glad to have heard it vocalized that way. Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yes, Bill, just to confirm that the whole idea of the steering committee is bottom up, bring in the stakeholders, the harvesters.
Very good. The way
Thank
it
you,
should
Bill.
be for all of our work.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions for Bob?
Not seeing any.
Okay, I guess I'm going to hand this back to Nicola.
Yes, we'll move on to other management board discussions that happened at the ASMC meeting a week ago. Next up is winter flounder. Just a quick update that the state waters commercial and recreational measures will stay status quo for the next 3 years. Most likely the next 3 years. However, the technical committee was tasked with evaluating possible changes to the Southern New England Mid-Atlantic recreational possession limit, which is just 2 fish. And it's an interesting process that the state waters set-asides are set by the New England Council based on recent years harvest. And so it's essentially a assumption that the measures aren't going to change. And then the ASMC meets to determine if there should be any change to the measure. So it's almost like you're stuck with status quo measures. So the board talked about that a little bit, and particular interest in whether or not that recreational possession limit for the Southern New England Mid-Atlantic stock could change in the future. So there may be more discussion of that. No change for 2026, but potentially for some of the out years. For spiny dogfish, the commission took complementary action with the New England at the Mid-Atlantic Council to set the spiny dogfish commercial quota for the next 2 years at 9.2 million pounds. That's just a slight downward adjustment from 9.34 million pounds, driven largely by increasing discards in non-dogfish fisheries. The commission also sets a trip limit for the northern region. It's been 7,500 pounds, consistent with the federal trip limit for a number of years now. So that was set status quo. However, there was some discussion about whether or not the board should be considering, or states should be considering, looking at any adjustments to that trip limit that would increase the economic efficiency of the fleet, given the declining quota and the low value of the fishery. And so, I expect that there may be some discussions between Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Rhode Island does weekly limits for a number of species, so they might be an example to look to. So I anticipate some additional discussions about possible future changes to the trip limit for dogfish, potentially with a weekly limit that would have to require some cooperation with NOAA Fisheries as well, since there is that federal trip limit that's also set at 7,500 pounds. But that's certainly something that we would want to talk to Massachusetts stakeholders about. In the past, there's been some hesitancy to increase that trip limit further to maintain, the product market value as best as possible. There was an update on American eel. There had been a petition by the European Union to list all anguillid species under CITES, and an Appendix 2 listing, which would have allowed for international trade of eel still, but there would be additional permitting requirements if that had been approved. However, the Conference of the Parties, which met late last year in Uzbekistan, rejected that petition to list American eel and other species of eel under CITES. Some kind of preliminary or ongoing updates about ongoing actions with Atlantic menhaden and striped bass is that the Menhaden Board is working on a draft addendum that would consider some revisions to the cap, the harvest cap for the reduction fishery that occurs in the Chesapeake Bay. You'll recall that the coastwide TAC for menhaden was reduced 20%. So some of the options look at a commensurate reduction in the Chesapeake Bay cap, as well as looking at sub-period management of it to disperse the effort or the landings throughout the season and not have it all aggregated at one particular time. With possible effects to other species or fisheries. So that is ongoing work at this point. Striped bass, you may recall that when the board late last year decided not to take a reduction in the fishery for 2026, that they did approve the formation of a work group that would be focused on the future management of striped bass, particularly under the scenario of lower productivity out of the Chesapeake Bay and other spawning areas as well. And so this was just the initial discussion about what are the tasks that that work group will be looking at, with the timeline, the membership for that work group. No decisions were made yet. There was a lot of diverse opinions about the work group. So at the next meeting, staff will likely bring forward a couple of different approaches or that work group could look like. But that is potentially a 2 year long, maybe longer work group that might not be starting right away either. We got some updates from NOAA Fisheries about MREP, particularly how the changes to the fishing effort survey, how the study is going about those changes and the eventual calibration of the estimates for the private vessel and shore modes. And initially, those recalibrated MRIP estimates were anticipated to be available in the spring, but due to the government shutdown and reduced federal capacity, those MRIP revised MRIP estimates are not anticipated to be available until the summer at this point. And following that, there would still those new numbers would then have to be incorporated into stock assessments to be fully incorporated into the management process. One other benefit that I think is of note of this fishing effort survey changes is that the MRIP team has been looking at potentially transitioning from the 2-month wave estimates to estimates being available every 1 month. And so the MRIP team is hoping to do that, but it's pending resources being available for them to switch to a 1-month estimates of recreational catch information. But that'll be something to hopefully come in the future. And then yesterday, there was a meeting between the ASMFC Policy Board, representing fluke, scup, sea bass, and bluefish, along with the Mid-Atlantic Council, to talk about an ongoing potential action addressing recreational sector separation or mode management, focusing on different management measures for higher fleet compared to private vessel and shore-based anglers. This is still in the early to middle stages of development, and the board and council had decided at the last meeting that the next step would be to put a work group together, an industry work group, recreational constituent work group, to provide additional input on the focus areas of this possible amendment, to help the board develop the range of alternatives under consideration. So the four focus areas include placing some guidelines potentially about how states or the commission uses mode management, including looking at a possible option for regional for-hire measures that would differ from the other modes, configuration of a possible letter of authorization program that NOAA Fisheries had proposed that would offer alternative regulations to federal for-hire vessels, and then federal for-hire permit requirements, potential use of a control date that the council approved to limit entry to federal for-hire permits for these species, or have some additional criteria for permits. And then, when you limit entry there, you have to think about new entrants and all that. So that is one additional topic. And then lastly, the fourth area focuses state for-hire permitting and reporting, and options for states to either limit entry to the for-hire permit or have mandatory reporting at the state level that would complement the federal VTR requirement for for-hire vessels with the federal permit. So those are the 4 areas that this work group will continue to discuss and hopefully lead to the board and council being able to finalize a range of alternatives that would move forward through an amendment process over the next year or 2. So importantly, the workshop itself would not be held until September. It would be in person for 1 to 2 days, and they're going to be looking for roughly 20 participants from the fishery, a combination of for-hire and recreational participants that are highly engaged in the management of these species and in the fisheries, to represent the coast at this workshop. And the plan is to have an online application process to apply to be a part of this workshop. And there would be a professional facilitator for the workshop, but that is something to be on the lookout for if anyone is interested in being a part of this process, that there will be an application process to be a part of it. And I think that is all. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Questions for Nicola?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Nicola, can you go back to the last slide? Being part of this conversation yesterday, I know there was a lot of angst about the number of participants. And in this slide, you also talk about the regions being 3 regions once again. I guess it would be Mass, Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, and then of course Jersey, its own region, and then the southern states as being a region. Is there any chance of the thought of putting 20 participants together from each region?
That was not the discussion. I think the regional breakdown is different for each of the species that is part of this action. So those regions didn't really come into play yet. So I have a little bit of a concern whether or not 20 participants can represent the entire coast for all four of these species and get a broad representation. So, it's possible that it might be a little bit more than 20 participants if the selection committee, thinks that they need to get, need to have a couple more to get that representation. But those regions that you mentioned, Ray, those are just applicable to black sea bass. They're a little bit different when it comes to fluke and scup, and bluefish is still managed on a coastwide basis.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Nicola?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Nicola. Great presentation. You're doing great work. Yesterday's meeting at ASMFC, my hat's off to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Moving along, Federal Fisheries Management Update. Who's this, Melanie or Kelly?
It's Melanie, Ray.
Oh, hello again.
Hello again. Jared, do you have the slides I sent you?
I do.
Great, awesome. Okay, so it was a relatively light agenda back in January with more updates and actions. This is the meeting where we typically develop recommendations for recreational cod and haddock fishing, which I'll get into after running through the limited access general category individual fishing quota program for scallops. We had a review for that, so that was received and accepted by the council in January. So the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act requires that all limited access privilege programs, including the scallop LAGC IFQ, undergo periodic review. So we had a 3-year review of the program back in 2014, and then a 5-year review was completed in 2016. And this latest one covers an 8-year period from 2016 to 2023. And in accordance with the guidance documents and the goals of Scallop Amendment 11, which focuses a lot on the LAGC fishery versus the limited access fishery, the review focuses on aggregate trends during this 8-year period. And you can see here some highlights of the review questions that the report seeks to answer on economic performance and net benefits, distributional analysis related to diversity and concentration, safety, compliance, and enforcement questions, and then, of course, conservation and management. So next slide. So in general, the report concluded that the LAGC IFQ program has been relatively successful. You can see the green check mark. So it's achieving the greatest net benefit to the nation relative to the baseline period, which was 2007 to 2009. It's achieving the goals of controlling capacity and preventing excessive shares. It's promoting high regulatory compliance, meaning staying within the quota, as well as vessel monitoring system pre-landing reporting. It's controlling mortality, and it's promoting positive conservation outcomes with relatively stable catch rates and total landings. What's been less successful are lease costs and decreased safety. So in terms of the lease costs, these account for approximately almost a quarter of the LAGC IFQ scallop revenues for vessels that leased in quota. So that's probably affecting profitability and could be limiting access for those dependent on leasing. The proportion of quota leased relative to the base allocation, again, that was back in the beginning, has increased from 50% in 2010 to 60% in 2016 to now in 2023, almost 80%. And so high rates of leasing indicate that quota mobility is supporting operational efficiency for many vessels, but may also be occurring at the expense of broader access to quota. So as the report states, quote, economic benefits do not appear to be equally distributed across participants, lease-only LAGC IFQ fishermen, fishermen who have limited or no allocation who rely on leasing quota to fish, and crew members appear to be predominantly bearing an increasing burden of lease costs, while increasing consolidation of quota allocations may be negatively affecting the ability for fishermen to participate in the LAGC IFQ fishery at different levels, end quote. And then in terms of decreased safety, this is really coming down to the increasing average age of the vessels and increased length of trips. Again, the report states both of these factors combined suggest that the safety of LAGCIQ fishermen has decreased due to the elevated risk of older vessels experiencing mechanical failure or accidents while fishing longer trips further from shore. Next slide. All right, so that was it for the IFQ program review. As I said, this was the report that the council received and the council accepted it. So that basically is ticked off that requirement of the Magnuson-Stevens. So the other big decision at the January council meeting was recreational groundfish. And I'm going to lead with a punchline and then go through some of the discussion that got us there. Just two reminders before I do. First, that the New England Fishery Management Council provides recommendations, but ultimately it's the regional administrator that will decide on the recreational groundfish rules for Western Gulf of Maine cod and Gulf of Maine haddock. And second, as you'll see on this slide, there are 3 columns for each stock. And that's because we have the current rules for fishing year 2025 on the far left. Then in the middle, the rules that were recommended by the council for fishing year 2025. So those were recommended, those have gone to NIMS, but we're actually still awaiting approval of those, even though we're nearly at the end of the fishing year. And then at the far right column, that's the punchline. That's what the council is recommending for fishing year 2026. And that is for Western Gulf of Maine cod, an open season of just 1 month in October, maintaining the 23-inch minimum size and the 1 fish per day possession limit. For Gulf of Maine haddock, this also is status quo in terms of what the council proposed last year. Open season year round, except for the month of March, and then a minimum size of 17 inches and 15 fish per day. So as I said, these measures would reduce the current cod open season by 1 month to October only and maintain the minimum size for haddock proposed back in 2025, but not yet implemented. So these recommendations go to GARFO for final determination. Next slide. So as I said, I wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of the discussion and how we got here. It wasn't very straightforward. I'll touch on a few key timelines and debate points that came up during the council's discussion. So the biggest issue in terms of the council's process was a delay in Wave 5 data. So when the AP and committee, the Groundfish AP and committee were running alternatives through the decision support tool, the model was utilizing Wave 5 data from 2024. That September-October period are the prime months of fishing access for these stocks right now. Then 3 days after the AP and the committee met, the final 2025 Wave 5 data became available. And unfortunately, it showed a really significant increase in effort compared to what 2024 shows. So that ultimately completely disqualified what the committee had recommended to the council because it would no longer keep predicted catch below the recreational cod sub-ACL. In a nutshell, angler trips basically doubled, cod catch increased nearly 4 times from what we had. So that left the council in a bit of a quandary going into its council meeting. So 2 days prior to the council meeting, the Groundfish chair worked with staff to present the council with 2 alternatives that would keep within the bounds of the previous discussion at the Groundfish AP and committee in terms of the alternatives they had discussed. And this really came down to this second bullet point of whether or not the private mode should retain a cod season, or so that would mean retaining a cod just during the month of October, or adopting a split mode option where the private mode, this is a little different than split mode options we had we've looked at for other fisheries or at other times for cod or haddock, because the private mode would have been closed to cod, while the for-hire mode would have been able to retain a single cod for both September and October. So as I led with, the council ultimately chose to retain a fishery for all modes. Then in terms of the haddock bag limit, there was a debate on this that arose during the council meeting. Public comment received after the council voted pushed for a 20 fish bag limit. This is where substance and process got a little messy. Public comment mistakenly didn't come until after the council had approved its 15 fish bag limit. In the council's letter to Garfo, communicating the recommendations it made, so this was just a letter that went to Garfo just last week. It was noted that 15 fish bag limit was unconstraining, and that at the time of the council meeting, there were no model runs from that decision support tool with 20 fish available. So there was no way to, there was no information for the council to determine whether that bag limit would keep us under the sub ACL for a reliable portion of the projected runs. So the council basically didn't have the necessary information about whether a 20 fish bag limit would meet the needs. And it was noted that public comments can still be submitted directly to NIMS. They have to undertake their rulemaking. So we'll have to wait and see where the haddock bag limit ends up. That may end up still having some comment, maybe adjust, but the council is recommending 15. And then of course, we need to initiate state rulemaking for complementary measures. And obviously, I'd look to Jared for any feedback on the potential timeline, but we'll provide a formal recommendation memo to be presented at a future MFC meeting. So this is really just a heads up to you all where the council is. And the last thing I want to touch on is that last bullet point, the MRIP fishing effort survey, which Nick just mentioned. It's cutting across all our recreational fisheries. And the general finding has been that private effort is overestimated in the shoulder months, which could obviously have a significant effect for the cod and haddock fishery, especially when cod is primarily caught by private anglers. And recently, the fishery's only been open during the shoulder months, wave 5, September, October. So we'll have to wait and see as that gets implemented. It's not happening anytime soon. It won't be able to impact 2026. So that's recreational groundfish. Next slide. So the last thing I want to touch on in terms of the January discussion, the council's been revising its essential fish habitat designations, a few stocks at a time. These changes are driven by updated species distribution and abundance data model outputs after a 5-year technical review was completed last January, in January of 2025. So bit by bit, the council is going to be revising the EFH text descriptions, maps for various life history stages. We've already done it for cod, herring, monkfish, and skate. This year, we're targeting updates for sea scallops, the small mesh multi-species and large mesh multi-species. And then next year in 2027, we'll round it out with salmon and deep sea red crab. And then next slide is just, we'll have a meeting in April. It's a little early, but to give you the final agenda, but initially it looks like we'll get updates on the Groundfish Amendment 23 monitoring system review, the redfish sector exemption program review. These were all things that got held up by the need to resubmit Amendment 25, Framework 68 Groundfish ABC control rule revisions, and our revised risk policy that we're working to implement along with revisions to the Groundfish ABC control rules. The one decision item we'll have in April as of now is approving a draft scoping document for potential IFQ in the monkfish and skate wing fisheries. And then we'll be initiating actions for various specifications for whiting and Atlantic herring. And I think with that, Jared, I think that's my last slide.
Thank you,
So
Melanie,
for your questions. Yep.
Thank you, Melanie, for your presentation. Questions for Melanie? Jared?
Not seeing any hands raised.
Thank you, Melanie. Your formal and great presentation as always. I guess we'll move this along to the North Shore Sea Scallop pilot program. And Dan,
Yep.
did you have a meeting yesterday?
We
on
did,
this?
and it was a follow-up meeting from a meeting we had back in December with some of the local small boat scallopers out of the North Shore. I'm going to turn it over to Story and Jared to give an update.
Thanks, Dan. Jared's going to put the map up, I think, of the area. So for the program, we had 31 CAP endorsement holders that signed up and met the qualifying criteria that went out in the advisory. So we have 31 participants, and these areas in the pilot open on Sunday, February 15th. And all these vessels will be getting a letter of authorization from us by Friday to participate in this, at least the ones that have, we've confirmed that they've installed one of the cellular trackers. So we've been working with the participants to make sure they've ordered those trackers and get them on board. As Dan described, the meeting yesterday with the participants and the on-demand gear participants, the lobster fishermen that are the handful of them that are fishing in these areas. I think the meeting was productive. We talked about ways that the scallopers can view that on-demand gear, the different ways they can do that, the free app, etc. And I think they talked through the timing of both the fisheries when they might exist in certain areas, and then a way to communicate with each other going forward. And we committed to bringing them back together in a month or at any time that's needed to talk through any issues that they might have on the water. So we'll be monitoring this, obviously any phone calls that come in, but also with the tracker data, we'll be looking at that weekly to see where fishing's taking place, the hotspots, etc. So we'll see how this goes as it gets going next week.
I just add two comments onto that from yesterday's meeting between the on-demand pilot program participants and the potential pilot program participants here. Is there seemed to be a willingness among the Sea Skull pilot program participants to kind of adopt the use of the available technologies, whether that's time zero upgrades or a phone app, to kind of monitor where this ropeless gear may exist in time and space and avoid that while conducting their tows. And then also, to the timing of these fisheries, the scallopers kind of want to get in there Sunday and, go heavy until, either the area's fished out, or if you're a federal permit holder, the Northern Gulf of Maine fishery opens later this spring, and the fishery shifts into federal waters, whereas the ropeless participants want access to some of the bottom within those exemption area boxes in April heading into May. So there might not be a lot of overlap of when this activity is occurring. So it might work. The potential conflicts that were raised a few weeks ago when we announced the Scholar program among the ropeless participants, I think, were largely mitigated yesterday.
Yeah, Jared, if I could add to remind the commission the work that we did in advance of this. We consulted many of the recreational scallop divers to determine where they fish, and we've moved the box out beyond the normal diving areas. We've incorporated protection for much of the cod conservation zone, where we don't want them towing through a group of spawning codfish should that occur. And also we've consulted with the Board of Underwater Archaeology to help the boats avoid any underwater wrecks. So, kudos to the staff to work, with all those different entities to try to create some fishing opportunities here.
Thank you for that, Dan. So questions for Story or Jared?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for your input. Moving along. Offshore wind energy update.
Brad Schandelmeyer.
Yep.
Brad,
Thank
you
Mr.
recognize.
Chair. I will share my screen here. Let's go with this one on. Are you seeing my screen?
We are now.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you all for having me today. Just happy to be here to give some updates on what's going on, what DMF is handling for offshore wind and some of the other broader ongoings. I'll start with the legal updates from the federal side, talk about the current projects that are ongoing in and around Massachusetts waters, and then Fisheries Innovation Fund, and then talk about some next steps for our project. You may have heard in the news recently, right before Christmas, the Department of Interior paused all 5 leases for the wind projects that are currently under construction, citing national security risks that were identified by the Department of War in classified reports. This action created a 90-day period by which the U.S. government would be able to work with leaseholders and state partners to assess possibility of mitigating these national security risks. Publicly, they were referencing a lot of unclassified reports that cited blades and towers creating radar interference that they called clutter, in addition to a lot of other public comments they made about offshore wind. One by one, these representatives for these wind projects sued the federal government, making arguments such as their projects were near completion, some were even generating power already, that the Department of Defense and other agency consultations had already been conducted during the permitting process, considering that they have tight timelines for their very specialized vessel contracts, that these suspensions would cause irreparable harm as well. The district court judges from DC, Virginia, and Massachusetts, in issuing their preliminary injunctions or preliminary stays, found that the rationale for national security used by Department of Interior may have been pretextual for the often stated federal dislike for offshore wind. They found that since nothing significant had changed since the federal review, that these actions appeared to be arbitrary and capricious. They found that the developers would have experienced economic harm without an injunction, significant economic harm, and that there was an insufficient or a full lack of evidence of emerging threats or adversarial technologies for this stoppage. In the table here, you can see each project, what date their legal decision was announced, and then how many days they lost on the water. And these, the stoppage is still an injunction, so there still will be another day in court here. But also in doing my research on this project or on this topic, I was able to find that there's a federal body called the Wind Turbine Radar Interference Mitigation Working Group. That's a mouthful, but it's staffed by experts from Department of Energy, Defense, FAA, NOAA, Homeland Security, and BOEM, where they fund and work with some of the brightest minds in the country, MIT, Sandia, Berkeley, to evaluate wind turbine radar impacts, develop and deploy mitigation measures, and encourage development of next-gen wind turbine interference-resistant radar. There are also mitigation agreements between the developers and the DoD and Air Force, whereby funds are volunteered and provided to the Department of Defense at the start of commercial operation to offset costs for mitigating these adverse radar impacts. And I did confirm that the WTRIM working group is still ongoing and still working towards their goals. So that's where we are legally. I think there's still more to come, but for the time being, all these decisions went in the direction of the developer. Speaking of the projects themselves, I'll just breeze over this one here. In purple on that map there, you have South Fork Wind that's been operating since late 2023. In the darker blue there, you have the 4 of the 5 projects that are under construction. I'm now including CVOW, Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind, which is off of Norfolk, Virginia, Newport News, Virginia. That will be, when finished, it will be the largest wind farm in the U.S. They have just started installing their first turbines. The projects in green there are not fully permitted, and we don't anticipate fully permitted projects that would get underway during this current administration. Specific projects in the Northeast that we pay very close attention to. The first off is Vineyard Wind 1. They are in the process of installing the final handful of blade replacements, and in my opinion, it could be done in the next month or two. They're also commissioning these turbines as they complete them. Over by New York, there is Empire Wind. They have all of their monopile foundations installed. They're installing the export cable from South Brooklyn out towards the array currently, conducting inter-array cable protections, commissioning the offshore substation that was delivered in mid-January, and installing turbines starting sometime in 2026. Over to the Ørsted projects south of Rhode Island, we have Revolution Wind. They have about a half dozen turbines left to go. They are currently installing with one vessel. They have another vessel installing and commissioning the offshore substation, and they're pretty much done with their inter-array cable protections. To the south of Revolution is Sunrise Wind. They have about half of their monopile foundations installed. They did that last summer and fall. They are currently commissioning their offshore substation in that single red box right there. And then they have completed the nearshore segment of their export cable, which lands around about halfway down Long Island. They have done the pull through the surf zone, and they're going to be starting the midshore section of that export cable in the coming weeks here. And they do intend to resume monopile foundation installation sometime in 2026. Just briefly on the Gulf of Maine, we have 4 out of the 8 lease areas that were available were awarded in late 2024. 2 by Avangrid, or 2 to Avangrid, 2 to Invenergy. We've seen communications plans from each of these groups, and of note as well is the Maine Research Array. While they don't have a developer for that currently, they are doing trawl surveys and other research activities in that area currently. I'll move on to the Fisheries Innovation Fund, something we spent a lot of time on in 2025, and we were happy to get over the line back in December. Just a bit of background on the fund for those of you unfamiliar. The Fisheries Innovation Fund is a $1.75 million mitigation fund created in 2020 by Vineyard Wind and EEA to support programs and projects that ensure safe and profitable fishing continues, conduct studies on the impacts of offshore wind development on fishery resources, provide grants for technology and innovation upgrades for fishery participants, where the criteria used to guide the disbursement of these funds will be developed in consultation with the fund's advisory panel. And the funding decision will ultimately be made by the trustee of the fund, who is the DMF director. So in 2025, DMF finished the RFP draft with help from CZM and DMF staff reviewing. Thank you very much. The advisory panel then reviewed and approved the RFP. They helped set the funding priorities, evaluation criteria, and then DMF was able to publish that solicitation in July as solicitation number 1. They received 20 proposals seeking $3.37 million by the end of the application period in August. Then we had an initial and a final review team evaluate the proposals, and the trustee was presented with the recommendations in November. Throughout the process, we had assistance from staff from DMF, CZM, DFG, EEA grants management staff, folks from Rosa were very helpful, and our external reviewers put a lot of time into this process as well. So I want to thank everybody that was able to help out. And finally, at our December 12th Fisheries Working Group and Commercial Fisheries Commission meetings in New Bedford, we were able to announce the awarded projects. Ultimately, we agreed on, or we were able to fund 6 projects and award nearly $1.2 million. 3 of these projects were fishing innovation priority based, 2 were community impact projects, and 1 was a safety project. And I will get into more detail about those projects here. The first fishing innovation project, fisherman-led gear innovation in southern New England, is going to be run by Captain Wes Brighton out of Menemsha. He'll be working with the Coonamessett Farm Foundation to develop, test, and monitor lighted fish traps for finfish and possibly squid, with the goal of producing viable gear solutions that can sustain and supplement fishing opportunities in and alongside offshore wind farms. Our second project that we funded, advancing mechanical jigging to strengthen squid fishery resilience amid offshore wind development, will be led by Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation and Dr. Dave Bethany. They'll be partnering with Coonamessett Farm Foundation, fishing vessels from New Bedford and Point Judith, as well as some other fishing industry organizations to leverage their existing knowledge to streamline deployment and operations of jigging machines, developing a standard operating procedure for deploying those jig gears, and then creating outreach materials to share the results with relevant communities and regulatory bodies. Moving along, Dr. Pingo He and Chris Rillahan from SMAS will be leading novel fish potting with lights for black sea bass and scup. They'll be working with Radar's manufacturing and a local commercial fisherman to develop and evaluate fish pots with a different LED light coloring. Commercial fishermen will then be deploying the best performing light in an offshore wind array, and they'll be measuring catch performance and describing economic feasibility of a broader adoption. Moving on to our community impact projects, we have a project from Eating with the Ecosystem in Cape, Missouri, called Resilience, Strengthening Markets for Massachusetts Seafood Through Video and Public Engagement. They'll be partnering with some commercial fishermen and chefs to promote Massachusetts harvested seafood through public engagement, produced video episodes, and social media. They'll host 4 public events in Massachusetts, which will pair the episode screenings with tastings and panel discussions. And the goal of this project is to reduce consumer intimidation, grow seafood demand, and build support for the fishing industry. Another community impact project led by the New Bedford Port Authority with the assistance from the New Bedford Ocean Cluster is a New Bedford Seafood Marketing and Promotional Campaign. This project will be guided by a New Bedford Fishing Industry Steering Committee, and with the goal of strengthening market visibility, consumer awareness, and amplifying the New Bedford seafood brand identity. And our final project is a safety project led by Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation, partnering with Superior Trawl of Narragansett and commercial fishermen, and they will be evaluating the hazard of trawling over cable protection mattresses. This project will be assessing how different trawl gears and gear configurations and sweeps, when towed at different speeds and directions, interact with cable protection mattresses, of which there are quite a few in Rhode Island Sound, West Passage area. They'll be documenting and describing any gear damage, snagging incidents, and movement of the cable mattresses. And ultimately, they'll be collecting feedback from the fishermen on handling, safety, and performance. Just some statistics on this funding. $742,000 of the nearly $1.2 million is going to New Bedford and Cape and Islands applicants, which was the majority of our applicants were from that region. The commercial fishing industry will be getting roughly $375,000 in funding. Commercial fishing vessel contracts account for $160,000, and the Massachusetts commercial fishing industry overall is set to receive around $236,000. I have a QR code there for the press release that DFG put out on the same day as our announcement. And wrapping up some of the other items and next steps. In the coming months, the Innovation Fund Advisory Panel will meet to discuss the awards, refine the application and review process, update the scope for the next solicitation, and discuss the spending plan for our offshore wind mitigation funds available in Massachusetts. From our funded projects, I plan on sharing appropriate progress updates mid-year or later, and we should have our first findings or final results from our one-year project in about a year. As for the other tasks and initiatives that DMF is working on, our offshore wind website will be updated in the next weeks to month. Now that our Fisheries Innovation Fund projects are all contracted, we'll be hosting information about them and promoting them or facilitating their engagement as needed. In fact, next week, one of our PIs will be speaking at a ROSA funder coordination meeting. As always, we'll be maintaining and strengthening our offshore wind related partnerships. We support the Commercial Fisheries Commission wind related actions, contribute to the Rhode Island, Massachusetts Boulder Relocation Working Group. I serve on 2 different ROSA groups and we'll be engaging on Gulf of Maine related topics with our neighboring states in the Gulf of Maine. Compensatory mitigation continues to require quite a bit of oversight, and we plan to support and amplify these programs through the Fisheries Working Group in the coming year. And additionally, I'm spending a bit of time helping lead the state caucus discussions for the Design and Oversight Committee of the Offshore Wind Mitigation Regional Fund. In the next weeks to months, I'll be attending the NOAA Cooperative Research Summit and the NYSERDA State of the Science meetings with my offshore wind hat on, so I'll be getting a little bit of time on Long Island. Lastly, some of the news from last week. Some you may have seen, Governor Healy signed a memorandum of understanding with Premier Houston of Nova Scotia that commits state expertise and resources to developing a partnership with the maritime province of Nova Scotia as they move towards developing offshore wind in the coming decade. So I look forward to supporting that initiative if requested. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. I see Bill.
Thank you, Brad. Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brad. This topic and that discussion that you just initiated could take up a week of time to get into the depth of all the points that you brought out. I'm going to ask one question, and I hope that there's a concise answer for it. Of the grants that were administered, I don't see anything that reflects the concern that a lot of fishermen have about the patterns of movement of fish when they migrate through areas where there's a high level of transmission energy being sent through the cables to the land masses. Were any applications made for that topic? And are there considerations, and has there been any work done that might elucidate how the patterns of fish movements during their migrations and spawning periods are going to be impacted by the energy that is going to be present in the water column from the high levels of power that are going to be going through these enormous cables? That remains my main concern.
Good question.
I appreciate an answer. Thank you.
I guess there's a couple of different aspects there. Our advisory panel, when I presented them with the RFP, helped guide what the funding priorities would be. And some members felt that fisheries research or offshore wind impact research was the primary focus of a lot of other funding sources. And in order to get more of these funds for cooperative research projects and funds in fishermen, back into the fishing community and the fishing industry, de-emphasizing fisheries research might be a good approach for the first solicitation. So I don't know if that will be the case for the second solicitation, but your specific concern about electromagnetic fields related to offshore wind transmission cables is a valid one. There is a suite of knowledge and literature on that to date. There are two projects ongoing with acoustic telemetry where offshore wind cables are landing on Long Island. We are paying attention to those findings and those projects as they are communicated publicly. I'm having discussions behind the scenes on when that will happen and when we can present those findings. And I'm happy to also announce that this Rhode Island, Massachusetts boulder relocation working group is pivoting a little bit, and we are doing a deeper dive into EMF impacts, both what's been learned in Europe, but also the existing knowledge and literature that's happened over here in the States so far. So I'm happy to follow up with you on that, and I hope that sometime later in this year we can get some more knowledge about that and the current understanding of EMF impacts in front of the Fisheries Working Group, which I know you attend as well.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Fair enough. I think your response was partially what I was hoping to hear. Let's continue a dialogue, please.
Absolutely.
I would like to continue to follow this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Questions for Brad?
Not seeing any other questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brad, for your presentation, and hopefully you and Bill Amaru will maintain dialogue on his concerns. That's often been my concern. Also, thank you very much, Brad.
Thank you.
Moving along, presentation on summer flounder stock assessment.
Yeah, Ray, this is in response to some of the requests from commission members that we got when we were debating altering the quotas and seasonal allocations of quotas and trip limits of summer flounder. There was concern among some of the members here that the distribution of fish may be changing, or maybe the assessment wasn't as accurate as it could be. And so we thought we would bring Elise Koob in. She's now filling the role of like the technical committee representative on these committees that ASMFC puts together for those three species of scup, sea bass, fluke, and bluefish. And we thought her presentation might shed some light on some of those concerns that commission members had in the past meetings.
Yes, so just for clarity's sake, Elise works for the Commonwealth.
That's right,
EMF.
Gary Nelson. That's right.
Yes, thank you very much.
She was promoted to that position, I don't know, a couple of years ago.
Thank you very much. Elise, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to turn my camera on real quick just to say hi. I haven't met most of the commission members. So as Dan said, I'm Elise Koob, and I'm one of our stock assessment scientists. Can everybody see audio?
Your presentation?
Yes.
But we don't see you.
Oh. My video was on for a second. I'll turn it off for the presentation, but
your slides are not in like presentation mode, at least.
Yeah, how about that?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. All right, I will jump right into it since Dan introduced this. So for a brief outline, I'll be talking about what is driving some of the stock assessment results that Dan was talking about, that we've seen this variability through the years and that you've experienced in some of the quotas that we've had recently. And I'll also describe the most recent assessment, as well as some of the data inputs and the review by the Scientific and Statistical Committee, and also some actions that the Monitoring Committee made. I then looked into some of our data from Massachusetts, including commercial catch, some of the MRIP recreational estimates, and some of our bottom trawl survey data. And then briefly at the end, kind of talking about what is happening at the broader population with these distribution shifts and some ongoing and recent research related to that. So first, for the assessment last year, the spawning stock biomass was estimated at 83% of the target, and that means that it's not overfished. So this first plot here is looking at that The target is the dotted line at the top. The threshold is the dashed line towards the bottom. And you can see that there's a little bit of an uptick there in recent years for our spawning stock biomass. Next, the fishing mortality was estimated at 76% of the overfishing threshold, so no overfishing was occurring. A similar plot here, looking at the threshold, and the fishing mortality trend line is below that. The model projections coming out of this assessment showed an increase to the overfishing limit for 2026 and 2027. And that is primarily why we are seeing this bump in the acceptable biological catch this coming year. And this is largely driven by a recent recruitment event from 2023 and 2024 that was pretty strong across the entire population. But I will get into that a little bit further into detail in a few slides. So for data inputs for the fluke assessment, it's generally accepted that we have pretty high quality data going into the fluke assessment. And one of that is the commercial data, which we're able to track and monitor pretty well through the quota management. There are 20 different fishery independent surveys going into the fluke assessment. And that's quite a high number, and 17 of those include age composition data, which is pretty important for the fluke assessment, which is a catch at age model. Additionally, there are 6 young of the year surveys going into the model, which is quite a lot. And the recruitment stanza in the assessment uses the last 14 years instead of the entire time series, which just gives a better average of what's happening in more recent years than through the entire time series. So the, excuse me, the Scientific and Statistical Committee review, they noted that there was very little retrospective bias in the model, which means that the model is very stable and is predicting consistent results from the past few years. And part of the SSC's responsibility is to assign a coefficient of variation to the overfishing limit that comes out of the assessment. And this is in order to quantify some of the uncertainty in the stock assessment model. And there are 3 different levels that the SSC can assign to an assessment, starting at 60%, then 100%, and 150. And based on the data inputs and that there was very little retrospective bias, the SSC assigned fluke for this most recent assessment the lowest CV of 60%. And it was also noted that this assessment is a flagship for the Mid-Atlantic species assessments. Now, the monitoring committee ended up applying a 12% management buffer to both the commercial and recreational acceptable catch limits. And this was due to concerns about short-term fluctuations versus an increase in stock productivity. And some of the following slides will describe why that concern came about. So this is a plot of the percent change in the acceptable biological catch compared to previous years. So for example, this final year in 2026, we're seeing a 55% increase. This does not include that 12% management buffer that the monitoring committee assigned. But so the 55% increase is just in comparison to 2025 ABC. So I will only go through a few of these, starting with this large increase in 2019, the 62% here. And from the 2018 benchmark assessment, one of the main things that happened was they incorporated the new IMRIP estimates from when there was a transition from the phone-based survey to the mail-based survey. And this increased those catch estimates for quite a bit through the entire time series. So this plot on the upper right here is showing the upper line is the new IMRIP estimates for fluke landings in weight, versus the lower line was the old IMRIP estimates. So you can see that those estimates did go increased quite a bit. Additionally, One of the main pushes for this large increase was that there was a strong 2018 year class detected in the assessment that you can see here on the bottom right. For the 2022 increase of 22%, we saw improved stock status. So the spawning stock biomass increased quite a bit as compared to a few years prior. There. Additionally, there is a new Mid-Atlantic risk tolerance policy that was implemented. And, excuse me, under the old risk policy, which is the dashed line on this plot on the bottom, the old policy capped P star, which is a parameter that's used to reflect the acceptable risk of overfishing. It capped that at 0.4 once the stock reached its biomass target. So essentially when the SSB reached the dotted line up here on the top plot. But the new policy, which is shown in the solid line in the bottom plot, raises the cap to 0.49, and it also allows the P-star parameter to increase a little more up to the biological target. So for example, in 2022, the P-star was about 0.44, and under the new policy, it's about where that star is. And then under the old policy, it would have been a bit lower at about 0.3. So this is just meaning that the new policy allowed for a little bit more risk when setting the measures. In 2024, we saw a pretty dramatic decrease by 42%. And this largely came out of, well, first there was a slight retrospective pattern that was small but persistent through the prior few assessments. And we saw that this dashed line here was the biomass estimate coming out of the 2021 assessment, and it was revised down a bit into this estimate here from the 2023. So that just revised the amount of biomass that was coming out of the assessment. However, the biggest contributing factor to this decline is that there was a major revision of the 2018 year class strength that I just talked about. So unfortunately, that year class did not pan out to be as large as we expected. And so dropping that year class down really affected some of the biomass estimates. And then finally, for this increase that we're seeing in the coming year, we have seen some strong recruitment from 2023 and 2024, and I totally understand that there's probably some hesitation to that statement given what I just said about the 2018 year class. But I will say that we have observed the 2023 year class a couple of times now, and it did show up in our own state SANE survey, and we believe that we were seeing it this past year in our bottom trawl survey, which I'll get into in a few slides as well. There was also a little bit of biomass savings because our fishing mortality was below the threshold for the past 2 years by, I think the 2023 estimate was 76% and 2024 was like 66%. So we were able to save, quote unquote, save some biomass in that. So getting out of some of the assessment weeds, looked a little bit to what's happening in Massachusetts. So this is a plot of the commercial catch of fluke in just the summertime fishery. And it's looking at catch from federal waters and state waters. Federal's in the blue kind of on the top and state is orange. And we're seeing, at least particularly in the last couple of years, there's a much larger proportion of commercial fluke caught in federal waters in these 2 years. There are likely a few reasons for this, but the question of availability, particularly for larger fish in our nearshore waters, is what I'll be digging into a little bit further in the coming slides. These are plots of the MRIP recreational estimates by mode. So we're looking at for hire, private and rental, and shore modes. And for private and rental and shore, we're seeing a pretty significant decrease in fluke catch in recent years. And these plots are split up between harvest and releases, with harvest in the lighter gray. I do want to note that the 2025 data is preliminary through wave 5. But this decline in these two modes in particular could be indicative of the availability of fluke closer to shore, where these modes typically fish. And just to mention, for higher, we do see a little bit of increase in recent years, but some of the years with the larger increases in total catch are driven largely by releases, particularly, I think it's in 2024 there. So this might be due to the availability of fish as well. So looking into some of our resource data, I wanted to see what I might be able to tease out kind of in this same vein. So the following plots I will note are all from the spring survey. I did also look into the fall and the trends were fairly similar, but just to keep it a little simpler, I'm just going to show spring. I also cut out the Cape Cod Bay and Massachusetts Bay regions due to low catch of fluke in those regions for our survey. So this first plot on the left, we're looking at the stratified mean for the regions of Buzzards Bay, Vineyard Sound, Nantucket Sound, and east of Cape Cod all combined. And the top plot is looking at number of fluke, and the bottom plot is looking at the weight. And so we can see there's a variable, but slightly an increase in abundance through the years, particularly in this final year here at 2025. We saw the most number of fluke that we've seen in the entire time series of the survey. However, what's interesting is that it is not the series high for the weight. So one thing we're thinking is that this might be that 2023 year class. So we were catching some smaller fish, even though that we caught a lot of them. So to break this out a little bit more, I wanted to look at this abundance trend by region and depth strata. So the rows here, the top is Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound combined, Nantucket Sound is in the middle, and East Cape Cod is on the bottom. And then the columns are in 30-foot strata from 0 to 30, and then adding on 30 for each cell. The biggest thing I want to look at here is that we see a pretty decent increase in catch of fluke in this deepest strata of Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound. And in the few cells before that, we can see there is a slight decrease in some of the shallower strata. So this might mean that the fluke are moving into these deeper areas that might be a little bit cooler. We also do see a little bit of an increase in fluke abundance in Nantucket Sound for both of the strata, including the most shallow one. And then the deepest strata for East Cape Cod Bay that we have significant catch is the 60 to 90 feet. And we do see a little bit of an increase there too in the most recent years. So getting into this question about we caught a lot of fish in the last year, but it wasn't the highest in weight. So what's happening with size? I wanted to look into the mean length by each of these regions and depths. So this is the same layout as the previous plot, but it's looking at mean length. And we do see a decrease in length in every single strata here. So what we've seen so far for Massachusetts is we're seeing some higher proportions of the commercial catch from federal waters. We saw a large decline in the catch for the shore mode and private and rental modes. And we're seeing some increase in abundance in some of our deeper strata in some regions in the state, and also this decline of size in some of our nearshore waters. So what might be happening at the population level that could explain some of these changes in availability in Massachusetts? Well, we've seen a pretty decent population shift in fluke in the past 20 years or so. So this is, I'm going to apologize for these plots in particular. These are from the 2018 benchmark assessment, and I'm not able to remake them, so I know they're kind of chaotic. But the plot on the left is looking at an earlier time series of 1994 to 2000, and the map on the left is looking at 2011 to 2015. And the main thing to note here is that this is looking at commercial vessel trip report, the distribution of that catch. So the main thing to note is that the density of these trips and the catch occurring at the earlier time series is off of North Carolina, Maryland, and Delaware, versus later in the time series, that catch really moves up and to the east and is off of New York and southern New England and some of Jersey. It's also worth noting that these darker cells here mean increased catch. So in terms of catch, we're also seeing more off this area of the outer continental shelf. And it's a very similar story for the trawl surveys. These next plots are looking at the fishery independent trawl surveys along the coast. So both the Science Center Federal Survey as well as the NEMAP inshore surveys. And so this is looking at the center of gravity of the population or of the catch in those surveys. And on the left is the fall, on the right is spring. And then this is also looking at both recruits and spawners. And so we can see from the earlier timestamp of 1976 to 2016 that the center of gravity of this catch is moving north and to the east for both spring and fall. And this plot is the same exact data. It's just looking at it in a little bit of a different way, and that the increase in these trends for both recruits and spawners for eastings, and which is at the top, and northings is at the bottom, just means that these fish are moving more east and more north. And it's pretty important to note that this is both recruits and spawners. So just briefly, there is some research going on for fluke distribution in the area. Rhode Island Division of Marine Fisheries started a tagging study, and they're also going to be doing a time series analysis. Unfortunately, I don't have any results yet. They are working through their first year of tagging data as we speak, so I'm hoping in a couple of months I might have an update on that. And then recently there was a paper by Dean et al., which was looking at some of these driving influencing factors for the spatial and temporal changes in fluke distribution. And they found that temperature and depth are the strongest ecological drivers for that. And with that, I will take any questions you have. Sorry, I can't see if there's hands up.
I'm not seeing any hands right now, but sure there might be a question or two. Not Mr. Chair.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Elise. On a lot of your graphs, I see the years through 19. Have we got more current information on the stock shifting? And all your literature here is dated.
Yeah, unfortunately, the largest conglomeration of data that has gone into looking at distributions, except for that recent paper and the upcoming research by Rhode Island, was coming from the 2018 benchmark assessment, where they really went into all the different data that has come up to that point. So unfortunately, that is why all of the data stop at 2018, 2019. It's 2019 because there was a paper coming out from that assessment with a lot of that work that was done.
Thank you, Elise. Questions from commission members?
Ray, I saw that Bill Amrou had to drop off the meeting, but we'll make sure that he's given the recording so he can watch this, at his leisure. But I think he was one of the key commission members who were asking for this kind of an in-depth analysis. And I think your presentation was outstanding, Elise. Thank you for coming through on that.
Yes, thank you, Elise. Question to you, Dan. I know Bill brought up at the last commission meeting his thoughts about getting vessels that are skate fishing and monk fishing during the winter months permits to land fluke. They're dead. When they're in the nets, they're dead. And I was wondering if that's been addressed or any thought has gone into that.
I'd have to look into that. Do those same vessels have federal permits? They just don't have state permits?
Well, they would have to have federal permits, yes, and state permits to land, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was just something that Bill had brought up because I know it's been going on, and as managers often say, if they don't have the correct data, how can they come up with good assessments? That's all. Just a question.
I mean, if well, I'll work with Jared on this, and we'll figure out if there's a need to address that through a permitting scheme, or even some kind of an exemption or bycatch amount. I don't know what the magnitude of this catch is, but we'll follow up with Bill on that.
Thank you, Dan. So, Elise, thank you for your presentation. And if there are no further questions for Elise, we're going to move on.
We have Ray Jarvis.
Ray, you're recognized. Thank you.
Ray, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought it was a great presentation and definitely informative. Gave us a little bit more information on fluke here in New England. And I'd be curious to learn more about the Rhode Island study that's ongoing and get some information when that does come out. But thank you.
Yeah, I will be happy to share that. They were estimating sometime this spring, maybe having the first round of results in.
Great. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Elise. Any other hands, Jared?
Not that no. We can move on to public comment.
We can move on. Other business from commission members for future meetings.
Ray, I believe Bill Doyle has asked to have some time under other business.
Bill?
Yes, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ray. I serve on the Shellfish Advisory Panel, and one of the things that we're constantly dealing with is wastewater. A few years back, DMF entered into an agreement with CMAC or SMAS to do some modeling off the coast of the different wastewater treatment plants. And there was the general opinion, I feel, at the SAP meeting is to ask if the MFAC could write a letter to the governor supporting the continued funding of this modeling. We've lost so much area due to either new or newly enforced FDA regulations because of the wastewater treatment plants. I know that Buzzards Bay area was closed down, I believe, 65% of the time last year. Where I grow, we were reclassified a few years back, which took us out of the European market. So I think it's important that we continue this. If you know, and that's just want to ask if you would consider writing a letter and sending it off. Dan, I'm sure you have.
Yeah. So, Bill, my because I chair that group, and I obviously I work closely with the chair of this group, and they're both appointed groups. This one that we're dealing with today is appointed by the governor, but the Shellfish Advisory Panel, I believe, is appointed by the commissioner. But you play a role in both, and you play a role on the Shellfish Advisory Panel as an MFAC representative. And so when the members of the Shellfish Advisory Panel, which meets 3 or 4 times a year, and we inform them, they inform us, we bring up emerging issues. I think it's been very beneficial. I know the hot topic of wastewater treatment plant model release modeling, like how far does the does the wastewater reach relative to dilution mandates for FDA. That has come up, and also the need to ground truth some of the results, because the models may say one thing. It's always good to get empirical data to sort of confirm those models. So in that Shellfish Advisory Panel meeting, there was a request to do just that, is to request, and I guess you could request the legislature. I mean, a budget process is something that the governor submits, her budget, and then legislature gets a crack at it. So there's many ways to do that, but I know it was the will of that group to maintain that funding. So if I think it would probably be a letter coming from you as a Shellfish Advisory Panel member, and probably submitted to the governor. I'm sorry, to the maybe to the agency, maybe to the commissioner, and of course that same letter could be shared with any of your legislators. But at this point, we're in pretty good shape relative to the budget, but for next year. We do have a $91,000 contract right now with SMAS to continue that work. But I think the message that you're bringing forward here is that that work is high priority for members of the shellfishing community. And so I guess that should be the message that would come from the Shellfish Advisory Panel. And then we could send it uphill to the folks in the department, et cetera. But it reflects your priorities, right, as a shellfish grower and as a member of that Shellfish Advisory Panel. So, Bill, I recommend between now and the next meeting, maybe maybe an email or some kind of communication to us and the rest of the commission to sort of make that known, and then we can sort of guide you as to how to get that to the folks who need that message.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And thank you for serving on both of those. We really appreciate your input.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Any other business to be brought up?
Suki?
Suki, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Thanks, Jared. This goes to Jared's story. I've kind of forgot it during the Scallop pilot program. Did you guys talk about ghost gear? I mean, these are two areas that probably haven't been dragged, had mobile gear in them like forever. And there's probably going to be a fair amount of ghost gear in some of the parts of those areas. Is there any discussion about doing anything about ghost gear? People get it up.
So there wasn't any discussion at the meeting yesterday, but under the new derelict gear framework that we've implemented, they would be able to bring in that ghost gear without any special authorization or permit. So we could certainly, when we get those letters of authorization out, or potentially as part of that letter of authorization, clarify that is allowed, that derelict gear caught in the routine course of dredging, if brought on the vessel, can be brought ashore and disposed of.
Yeah, and a couple of the participants have mentioned that, Suki, early on. And the other good thing is we're going to have dumpsters for gear in Rockport and Gloucester during this time period. So that's a good idea, Jared, to put that right in there.
Okay, sounds good. I knew with the new rules it would make it easier for somebody who wanted to deal with it, but like I said, it's probably going to be a fair amount in some of them places, and it's just a shame if it's just going to all get heaved back overboard again, type of thing. So going forward, that sounds like I didn't know there was going to be dumpsters around either. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Suki. Any other business to be brought up by commission members?
Not seeing any hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Then we'll move to public comment. Have you got a...
So if any members of the public wish to comment to the commission, you can use the raise hand function. We will recognize you. I'll create a queue and I'll recognize you. Once recognized, you can unmute yourself and take a couple moments to address the commission. First, we have Beth Cassoni. Beth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Jared. Can you hear me?
I can, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the time to comment. I'd like to thank the Division of Marine Fisheries and their staff and Commissioner Tom O'Shea for coming, and Deputy Commissioner Safathia Thankin for coming to the annual weekend. It takes a lot of effort to put this together, and the fishermen enjoy the time to come together to talk to other fishermen and also to talk with the Division of Marine Fisheries. As Dan mentioned early on, that it seemed a little heavy in the presentation and that the industry wanted more time to ask Q&As. And I think for next year, if we could maybe do an hour and a half, an hour and 15, and then maybe 45 minutes of Q&A, that would go a long way. And I know that the staff and alike were available for comments and questions upstairs, but I feel that the industry that comes to the trade show, and especially that comes to the round table, they want their peers to hear their concerns too. So instead of having sidebar conversations, I think we need to give more time for the Q&A at the round table. But all in all, it was a great event. And to Tom O'Shea's comment earlier, the crustacean nation is still strong and we will carry on. The Patriots, made it to the Super Bowl and we'll get there next year, hopefully. So I appreciate everyone that came and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you, Beth, for your comments.
All right, Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any other hands raised from the public queue, so we can proceed to adjournment.
Well, I would like to thank the entire commission for its participation today, along with DMF staff. I thought it was a very good meeting. Thank you all for attending, and I'll need a motion to adjourn.
I can make that motion, Ray.
Thank you, Shelley. I need a second.
I can second that.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Ray, congratulations. You are absolutely on schedule. It is 12:15.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Jared. You all have a good day. We are now adjourned. Or all those in favor?
Aye.
No objections.
No objections.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. Thank you all.